My name is Uzi. I'm one of the teachers of Congregation D.C.B, CHOKMAH, located in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn, New York. Our address is 382 Hamilton Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. The zip code is 1131. That's for everyone out there that would like to contact us. Our day of operation for services is on Saturday or on the Shabbat from 11 a.m. until sundown. So thanking everyone once again for tuning in to us on another Haftarah review. And the Haftarah that we will be going over is the previous week's Haftarah, which is the Haftarah Wayigash. Thanking the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth, for all things and everything, for life, food, clothing, and shelter, and knowing and understanding that he is the only God, the Most High, and we give glory unto his high and holy name. Thanking the creator of heaven and earth for the leader of our organization, even by D.C.B, that being Chief Prince Yisrael, Ben Yissaskar, that the Most High God will bless him, will bless his family and his household, be with his wife and his children, and that the Most High God will continue to guide him and protect him. Also thanking the Most High God for all the elders and the teachers and all and everyone who has contributed, even online, even our family online, who tune in faithfully every week to give us an ear and to even put us in a position to be able to continue to do these lessons and bring forth these reviews. And that we're holding your attention. We don't take that for granted, that you actually tune into us, because we actually are holding your attention. So we give glory to the Most High God for putting that within us to be able to convey the word of the Most High God to each and every one of you. So thanking everyone once again, and I pray that everyone had a blessed week. And we pray on this day, sending everyone an early Shabbat Shalom and praying that the Most High God be with you all. So once again, we're going to be going over Haftarah Wayigash, and it's going to be done by none other than the man who's been doing these portions from week to week, none other than one of my teachers, even one of my mentors, none other than Nasik, Zurishaddai ben Yehudah. How are you, Nasik?
Great, good. Baruch Hashem. First of all, I'd like to give praises to the Supreme Eternal Universe, God of my forefathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. And with respect to the platform I'm on, the D.C.B channel platform, D.C.B congregation, the spiritual leader, Chief Prince Yisrael Ben Yissaskar, to the host, Chief Uziel, to the princes, chiefs, rabbis that's out there, Maureen, Connie, brothers and sisters, and visitors to the channel. I greet you all in the time of forefathers. Shalom Aleichem, and early Shabbat Shalom, very early Shabbat Shalom. I'd like to first off start saying, Adonai Septai Taku Fiyagi Tiatheaka, O Lord, down my lips and my mouth should declare thy praise. And we'll be going over, first I'd like to always go back. My main theme is to deal with the Haftarah Wayigash, but I would like to also look into some of the portions of Wayigash, because for me, that's one of my most exciting portions out of Sidros, out of Genesis. And as we get near the end, because dealing with the family and family, talk about a family reunion, it builds up into actually a family reunion. And that's what's great about Wayigash. And the term Wayigash means, and he approached. And also, and that term you approach with trepidation, but also conviction. And that's what I like. And Moses, when he drew into the thick darkness, where the Creator was, that after the Creator had talked about, gave us the Decalogue, or normally known as commonly used as 10 Commandments. And when he got through speaking, the people said, Moses, speak thou with us, and we were here. But let not God speak with us lest we die. And then, Moses said what he had to say, and he drew into the thick knowledge of what the Creator was. And Wayigash, we know from me case last time that from Wayigash that they went back there, and like I said before, they had Benjamin with them, and it was difficult to understand because I left a couple of questions on the table. I hope you had some healthy discussion concerning that they guaranteed the return of Benjamin, but they didn't guarantee the return of Shimon and let him and take it as a captive for a surety. So it brings a lot of areas of discussion. Well, I hope y'all had a very healthy discussion. I'm not going to go into that. I'm sure your various places might have had those very healthy discussions. And I like sometimes discussions in those areas because it's really not a wrong answer to be brought out, but it's always variables of answers that can be considered, about Benjamin being snatched up. I mean, Shimon being snatched up and not being able to be escorted out as collateral for them to bring back, Benjamin and to prove that they're not a spy. That's something to be considered, in that area. So we know that now the last scene we left off with was that Benjamin was set up to appear like he stole as a thief, and he stole possibly the goblet of who they didn't know at this time, Pharaoh. Now I also like to, I guess I'll say that for when I just highlight a couple of things going forward. But I'm going to read the 44th chapter of Genesis, the 18th verse, in its entirety, because it's a lot of information I'd like to bring out in reference to this. After they already came back, they tore their clothes, and there was a surety for Benjamin, and Benjamin looked like he's the guilty individual. But it was just strictly a setup in that area. Then Judah came near unto him and said, O my Lord, let thy servant, I pray thee, speak a word in my Lord's ear, and let not thy anger burn against thy servant, for thou art even as Pharaoh. All right, now, what is important is that in ancient times, even today, in cases, once a judge make a ruling, that's the end of that. Now, some places you might say, well, I want to get an appeal. But in ancient times, there was no such thing as you're going to get an appeal. Even in our way of life as Israelites, if there be a matter between blood and blood, plead and plead, you should go to the priests, the Levites, and the judges that shall be in those days. Now, what's interesting is that the matter, once it's decided, you don't take it to any other place. Whatever the matter is decided, that's it. So there's no such thing as an appeal in our way of life. Once a guy casts a verdict, whether it's guilty, not guilty, whether it's thus and thus, there's really no amendments to the verdict. So, and that's even in Israelite culture. So imagine you got a guy that's second to Pharaoh, and when he made a verdict, that should have been it. But Judah boldly approached him and said, not only I want to approach you, perhaps when he said you want to speak in your ear, then that means right then and there, perhaps you didn't hear me clearly or understand me clearly or understand the gravity of what's going on clearly. So I need to also not only get that close to you, but I got to also reach down into your very being that you understand my situation and the situation we in. And that's what I like about this. And it said, my Lord asked his servant, saying, have ye a father or a brother? And we said, my Lord, we have a father, an old man, a child of his old age, a little one, and his brother is dead. And he alone is left of his mother, and his father loveth him. And thou saidest unto thy servants, bring him down unto me, that I may set my eyes upon him. And we said unto my Lord, The lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. And thou saidest unto thy servants, except your youngest brother come down with you, ye shall see my face no more. And it came to pass, when we came up unto thy servant, my father, we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, go again, buy us a little food. And we said, we cannot go down if our youngest brother be with us. Then we will go down. For we may not see the man's face, except our youngest brother be with us. And thy servant, my father, said unto us, ye know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one went out from me. And I said, surely he is torn in pieces, and I have not seen him since. And if you take this one also from me and harm before him, you will bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Now, therefore, when I before I get to that, I'll stop right there. I go down to the grave. What's the tactics here I like that Yehudah employed, even he tried to bring out an appeal when the appeal was never on the floor, is that, one, you ask us questions like if we're going to marry into the family, that's number one. Also, when Yaakov said that why you did me so wrong by giving up so much information, they said that the man asked us straightly. So I want to bring out this point. He asked them straightly about their family. Now, we don't read about that prior, but now the support that they actually was telling the truth is right here in this picture, in this Sidra Wayigash, because Joseph's right there. That's the man they can talking about that asked them straightly concerning the family. He could have said, I didn't say all that. So now we find that some things that was discussed, we didn't read about it prior, but we're reading about it here in front of the guy who's Joseph, who they think is a stranger, could validate or invalidate that being true or not. So I just wanted to stop there and bring out that point. Now, therefore, when I come to thy servant, my father, and the lad is not with us, seeing that his soul is bound up with the lad, it will come to pass when you see that the lad is not with us, that he will die. And thy servant will bring down the gray hairs of thy servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. For thy servant became surety for the lad unto my father, saying, if I bring him not unto thee, then I shall bear the blame to my father forever. Now therefore, let thy servant, I pray thee, abide instead of the lad, a bondsman to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brethren. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad be not with me, lest I look upon the evil that shall come on my father? Now, what I read that out for a particular purpose, not so much to be redundant, but bring out some highlighting points that I find very interesting. Is that it's no longer trying to exonerate Benjamin as being a thief. It's no longer about Benjamin being innocent. It becomes now a matter of, I'm taking the situation in the picture and focus off of Benjamin's, who appeared to be crying, and bring it on the emotional sympathy of a father who's bounded up in this lad, that you want not only cause Benjamin to become a slave, but if you're a just individual, you got to say, well, what repercussion are you going to have on the old man, our father, who is your servant? And said, you're just like Pharaoh in here. So that could mean a bunch of things, but I'm not going to go into that there. But so now, what I like more so is that this is the first time in scriptures that you actually have an individual that's willing to sacrifice their life for another. It's one thing to fight alongside. There's another thing to fight to rescue. But knowing that you're going to just greatly submit to whatever punishment that this individual have and take his place, knowing it could be even a death sentence, that is self-sacrificing. So, and that's what make Yehudah so unique amongst all the other brothers. He didn't have to admit that that staff was his. Tamar never said the name of the individual who impregnated her. She just sent it, and she wasn't even there in the room. She just sent it and said, I am pregnant by the individual who these belong to. Now, if you admit it, I'm free. If you don't admit it, I might as well be dead. And he admitted his sin, admitted his wrong, and he stated also in the matter of what he was wrong in. So that's what you call, and he said he knew her no more. So that's what you call a Baal Teshuvah, a master of repentance. And it's important just to, get these ideas and concepts, down as we go to the area of Binyamin. I'm willing to sacrifice. But what I brought out, but which I'm not going to bring out now too much, is that, can you imagine the emotions that Joseph's going through before we can go through that? The emotions he have to go through, knowing that here it is. Y'all, the two brothers killed the whole city. Y'all was upset about what happened to Dinah. All right, but yet you hated me. Y'all all was willing to come back when you was going home. It was allowed to go home for the sake of Binyamin to be slave. But I was a slave all them years. And now you willing to sacrifice your life for Binyamin, but nobody was willing to sacrifice their life for me. And then also, at this point in time, when he talked about the second brother, he said the brother is dead, as opposed to the first time when he said the brother was not, in Yehudah's approach. So I just want to read just a little bit more of this before I go into the Haftarah. It says, then Joseph could not refrain himself before all of them that stood by him, and he cried and caused every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians heard, and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph, doth my father yet live? And his brothers could not answer him, for they were affrighted at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near. And he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. And now be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that you sold me hither. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and they are yet 5 years. And then it goes on, you skip on down. So in the 8th verse, it says, to save you alive, and a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God, and he had made me a father to Pharaoh, and the Lord of all his house, and rulers over all the land of Egypt. Hasten ye and go up to my father, and say to him, thou said thy son Joseph, God, thus said thy son Joseph, God had made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me and tarry not, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen. All right, but it goes a little further, and it says, 11th verse, and there I will sustain thee, for there are yet 5 years of famine, lest thou come to poverty, thou and thy household, and all that thou hast. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Binyamin, that is my mouth that speaketh unto you. And you should tell my father all my glory in Egypt, and all that ye have seen, and ye shall hasten and bring down my father hither. And he fell upon his brother Binyamin's neck and wept. And Binyamin wept upon his neck. and he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. And after that, his brothers talked with him. I had to read that. I'm sorry, that's a little bit long, but after many of you heard the Sidra already, but it's a couple of points I'd like to focus on here. One of the things is this, that they never mentioned who the brother name was that was missing. So that's a foul, bingo. All right. Joseph's name wasn't mentioned throughout the whole ordeal the first time. And it wasn't mentioned this time. So now this guy say, hey, and he's going through another name. He's going by another name. All right. So he said, hey, I'm your brother Joseph. But first thing he wanted to know was say about his father, concerned to his father. So that was the right tactics Yehudah brought out, not knowing that you can, do you have any empathy for somebody else? And that's what, would be a quality that a good individual will have when you can have empathy for somebody else's feelings. All right. And I'm going to just share this quick story and then I'm going to move on. I can identify with this particular episode when Joseph recognized in the early part of the portion, says when they first came down, Joseph recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him. They seen Joseph from afar off, and it was just plotted to kill him, and they, at the end, selling him. So they seen him afar off. They didn't see him close. So what do that mean, to see him afar off and not see him close? And what do that mean now that you identify? Because now you spoke to an interpreter before. Now you're speaking in the Lashon Kodosh, the Holy Tongue, or we commonly say Hebrew. And you in there, you're taking a chance to be in a spot where you got 11 desperate individuals, and you send everybody out from you. Now that is being vulnerable, and you identify by name. You make yourself known. There's always controversy. I always say, show the sign of the covenant. That's one of the teachings I use in reference to that. And you're speaking the language. So it's three things. You identify a name of the brother that's missing. You speak in the language that they thought you didn't know. And not only that, not only that, you're trying to say you recognize them in those areas there, but you let yourself vulnerable at a time. Say, look, if you're gonna do something, you could do it now, pretty much. So those are strong convictions on both sides. So it's a very emotional thing. And the reason I'm going to bring that out, because when we get into the Haftarah, and there's other little things I want to bring out, which is only about 13 verses, is in reference to this particular Sidra. And it's one of the few Haftarahs that pretty much hones in similar to a reunion, a family reunion. What is I find even interesting in this area too, is that, and I said I was going to share the story about my own personal life. I have a younger brother. We had the same mother, but different father. But he's much younger than me, and he stayed in a lot of trouble. Unlike Joseph, he stayed in a lot of trouble. So the only similarity is that he did a lot of cross-bar hotel time, and so I haven't seen him, and maybe about at least at the time I didn't see him for about maybe 15 years, something like that. And this, that's my younger brother, and right now he's about 6 years old. But I'm saying I haven't seen him in 15 years. And I was walking down the street in Brooklyn, and headed to this restaurant, and I'm about literally about maybe 60 feet away from him, about 60 feet away from him. if he didn't, and he was talking to another guy, I see him, I'm looking at him, but I didn't recognize him because I haven't seen him in a long time. He's my younger brother. And he was talking, and when he seen me coming down the block, you know, less than 50 feet, 60 feet away, he said, "There's my big brother right there." And I you know, when he started smiling and laughing, so I walked towards him, but I wasn't even going to walk towards him. I was going to keep going straight ahead, walking, you know, pass right on by him. But I walked towards him when he said, "Oh, there's my big brother right there." And I was coming right now. Now, mind you, I haven't seen him in about 15 years because he stayed in a lot of situations. And I wasn't looking for him. And in this case, he really wasn't looking for me because he didn't know how to find me a lot easier than I would be able to find him. And he know family members I'll be in contact with. And what caught my attention is that when he say brother, whether big brother, little brother, whatever the case is, but the thing brother. And when I looked at him, I recognized him right away. But I wasn't looking for him, wasn't thinking about him, and I would have passed right by him. So Joseph, in his case, when he showed himself to be a brother to the rest of them, that's when they was able to talk with him. And that's what I'm trying to say, that sometimes, you know, they didn't look at him, they seen Joseph from afar, but now they got a chance to get close. And he hugged them and everything like that, fell upon their necks, and, you know, and kissed them after him and Benjamin wept. Now, one of the things is a lesson to be learned, not just a commentary, a rabbinic tradition. I'm going to bring this out right quick. It's a lesson to be learned in the weeping that they draw on from Benjamin weeping on Joseph's shoulders and Joseph weeping on Benjamin's shoulders. Is they say, "Well, what you crying for?" You know, and not a commentary. It's a traditional. You don't have to accept this, but it's a lesson, a moral lesson behind it that I want to share. It said that Benjamin was crying because some kind of way prophetically he's seen that the tabernacle would be dismantled that was on Joseph's property, the territories of Joseph, which is, you know, Ephraim, you know, and part of Manasseh. So he was weeping because he's seen somewhere down in the future that Benjamin can have the temple destroyed twice. Because part of it, even though it's at Jerusalem, part of it, most of the temple is on Benjamin's territory. So, and they say, well, okay, so what's the lesson I'm trying to convey here? And what's the lessons that they bring behind that? Even though I'm not saying it's true about why they're crying, but the lesson to be developed of the cry. And the lesson, you know, I like to share is this, is that it's okay for you to cry for somebody else's tragedy. It's okay to do that because you're lending them support and there's nothing more you can do. But for your own tragedy, you're supposed to take some kind of action. That's why they use the term about each one reaping, crying for the other one, is because I can't help you in your thing. All I can do is feel for you and sympathize for you. And same thing here. Benjamin couldn't help Joseph in this situation. All I could do is just, you know, sympathize and show support. Sometimes when a person have a problem, the best you could do is sympathize in their problem, whether it's a disease, whether it's a family lost member, or whatever the case is, or something they lost, a limb or something. You could sympathize for them. You can't take no action for them. They had to take the action in their own problems. And if there's only one lesson to be learned, you know, the time to cry is when you can take action, you know, for a situation. You know, when you're showing sympathy for somebody else, it's okay because you don't show some kind of support. Now, I like to also bring out. We know I'm just gonna move on from that, but he gave him stuff and sent him on back to Goshen and everything like that. But the main thing I wanted to bring out in this story is about the brothers themselves recognizing Joseph and how they begin to recognize him when it's a show of affection. Now, I just want to bring out one more area is about Jacob when he was told that. Imagine bringing that news back to their father. And when they bring the news back to their father, after all those years, talking 22 years, all those years, but, he's mourning for a son, and yet all the other sons there, all his other grandkids is there, and Yaakov himself had to change, change his demeanor after he's seen the wagons. So he's seen the wagons and everything like that. And there's comments on that, why we see the wagons, and that's another story. I'm not going to go in, but when his spirit revised, and when he's seen the wagons, and it said, they told him, 27th verse of the 45th chapter, it says, and they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said unto them. And when he saw the wagons, which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob, their father, revived. And Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. Why, if you know if it's enough that he's alive, why I need to see his face? Something to discuss, because I know he's alive. Why I need to go down there and see his face? Why can't he come to me? These are questions you could discuss. Why did Joseph didn't send, he sent provisions to bring them down, but why he couldn't just support them where they were? Those are things to discuss. I'll address those, and if questions come up in reference to it. But I like to leave things for people to discuss in reference to you, the second man in charge. Why your father and everybody else got to uproot to come to Egypt? You trying to fulfill the prophecy that Abraham was told, and everything like that. Those are things to discuss. All right. But one of the things I like in the 46th chapter, it says, and Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac. He didn't say Abraham, just his father Isaac. And God spoke unto Israel in the vision of the night and said, Jacob. And he said, here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, but I will there make thee a great nation. And I will go down with thee into Egypt. All right, so the Creator didn't talk to him for years. We don't know how long. I don't know how long. But you figure Isaac was around when Joseph was taken. Isaac been dead already and buried for at least 10 years. Before Yaakov went down to Egypt. Because we got that, but we know how old Yaakov was when he went to Egypt. It was 130. And he was 120 when his father, Yitzchak, died. So Yitzchak been dead 10 years. And there's 22 years that he haven't seen Joseph. So when we do the math and we look at that, we'll say, well, how is it that the Creator didn't even communicate with him, or he didn't try to communicate with the Creator in reference to that story? Or Isaac wasn't mourning as much as Yaakov mourned? Or could it be that he might have mourned for Yaakov, but it's for Yaakov to take action, not for Isaac to take action? So these are something to discuss. All right, so I'm just going to move on. We know about when they approached Pharaoh, first question they asked about, how old he was. They said his occupation was shepherds and stuff of that nature. And he's presented 5 brothers. There's always a controversy about which 5 brothers, because we don't know. Tradition has they chose the brothers because of certain things that's written in scriptures, in the way it's written in scriptures. I'm just going to throw these names out, but you can always, there's nothing etched in stone. I'm just saying what most traditions teach, that the 5 brothers was Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Benjamin, and Yisrael that he presented before Pharaoh. And the purpose was, everybody give Reuben a hard time and everything like that, because of, what happens in life. But what is, the thing was not to be caught up in the metropolis of Egypt. So therefore, Pharaoh looked at these guys. They don't look like they, he said, he looked and said, well, all right, they look okay, but they're not impressive enough. And how we know, he said to Pharaoh, they're not impressive enough, is because he said, if you know any amongst you, that is able and everything like that, they could be over my cattle. He just presented 5 brothers. So you could discuss, why would Pharaoh say that when 5 brothers are standing right in front of him? So then you got to look at Jacob. What kind of question is to ask your number 2 man with all his power? How old is his father? That's a rough question. And yet Yaakov said, I'm 130 years, but I didn't attain to the years of my father and my forefathers. But he has 130 years. But that the number 130, we have a thing where Adam got a son in his image at 130. All right. And then we read about Yaakov being able to see the face of his son at 130. So you could discuss different correlations and say, well, wow, is that something to consider or just something to gloss it? All right. So now I'm gonna go into the Haftarah itself, but it's a lot of other little nuggets in Wayigash, but for the sake of time, I'm going straight to the Haftarah, which have come from the book of Ezekiel, the 37th chapter. And we come from Ezekiel 37th chapter and picking it up from the 15th verse. Now, in the beginning of that chapter, Ezekiel was one of the prophets that went into captivity, Babylonian captivity. So some say it might have been 587 that he went in there. Some might say 597 that he went in there. We know Daniel went over there. We know, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael was there, in that Babylonian captivity as captives. But it teaches a valuable lesson that everybody wasn't wicked. It just wasn't enough people to stay in the land that was righteous. And so therefore, some people had to go off into Babylonian captivity. But yet, Ezekiel being a prophet, and he's there during the time before the temple was destroyed. Just like Daniel and them, they're there before the temple was destroyed. So now, if they're already in Babylon, as a captive and stuff, and you say, okay, the Creator could still work with you, even in your captivity? Yes, he can. And if you're worthy enough, and if his message need to be there. But it's opened up about the valley of dry bone in his vision. And the dry bones are identified as the nation of Israel. That's the dry bones that are identified. But I like to point out, I always had a issue with the thing that when the Creator asked him, can these bones live? And he said, Lord, thou knowest. That is avoiding the question and not answering a question. Can these bones live? I could say what I would say, and what I would think would be the proper answer would be, if it be your will, can you hear us on? If it be your will, anything is possible. Because I can't say for sure, is they worthy of being alive? And he identified who the bones are. So that means he didn't even recognize the bones. So that's a correlation. The brothers didn't recognize Joseph. Joseph recognized them. And just on this side, Ezekiel in his vision don't recognize who these bones are. And he gave up hope on the bones. Almost like Yaakov gave up hope for a minute on Joseph. But we're going to pick it up now and pick up some of the correlation. The 15th verse. If you got it, you can start.
We're in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37, starting from verse 15. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
And the word of Yahuwah came unto me, saying, And thou, son of man, take thee one stick and write upon it for Yehudah, and for the children of Yisrael his companions. Then take another stick and write upon it for Yosef, the stick of Ephraim, and of all the house of Israel his companions.
Keep going.
And join them for thee one to another, and to one stick, that they may become one in thy hand.
Mm-hmm.
And when the children of thy people shall speak unto thee, saying, Wilt thou not tell us what thou meanest by these? Say unto them, Thus saith Adonai Yahuwah, the Lord Yahuwah, Behold, I will take the stick of Yosef, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Yisrael his companions, and I'll put them unto him together with the stick of Yehudah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand.
Well, right there. I stop right there. Mm-hmm. Now, what is interesting is this. First, you had a spiritual vision of unification. Now you got, and this is different from now there, because now you had something spiritually that Ezekiel was involved with on a vision about the valley of the dry bones. Now, it said that we're going to do some symbolism. So we're going to take a physical form now, but symbolisms. And you're going to take a tree, they say stick a lot of times, but, S. And you're going to write upon in the name of Ephraim and his companion, and then and Judah and his companion. And what's odd is that Ephraim and Benjamin, Joseph and Benjamin is really close from the same mother. But yet, Benjamin stuck with Yehudah, and the rest of the tribes, Manasseh and all of them, went with Ephraim, and stay with that. So now you got part of Rachel's kids split, whereas you have one of Rachel's descendants, Joseph, is in charge of the northern kingdom with all the other tribes, and her other son, Benjamin, who's also of Rachel, decided to stay with Yehudah. And you can say, well, is it some kind of attitude of gratitude? When we read in the book of Judges, when they did a serious job on Yehudah when they had a battle, where they wiped out so many thousands of Yehudites in a battle over an issue. But yet Benjamin decided the only tribe to stay with Yehudah, as opposed to the rest of them that left and went their way. So that's an interesting point. And when I said the biggest thing about Wayigash is the approach is to talk about family reunion. And here it is, the Creator said, first thing you need is a spiritual revival. You got to keep hope alive, and then you got to acknowledge different individuals from one spot to another spot and say, they got to come together and you're going to join them, So that means that they're not joining on their own. The prophet himself got to take those two sticks and put them together. And then the Creator saying, I'm making them become one in your hand. That's where we at right now in this conversation of hope. Now, mind you, this is going on where Ezekiel is sharing with the captives in Babylon at this time. All right, continue. 20.
Verse 20, it reads, And the sticks whereon thou writest shall be in thy hand before their eyes. And say unto them, Thus saith the Lord Yahuwah, Behold, I will take the children of Yisrael from among the nations, whither they are gone, and will gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Yisrael, and one king shall be king to them all. And they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all.
Hold right there, hold it. All right, we got a lot of stuff going on here. All right, one of the things we talk about an ingathering, you know what I mean? And because you talk about spiritual restoration, then you talk about this whole thing of Ezekiel, the 37th chapter. It's two parts, you know, a spiritual, you know what I mean, restoration, all right, political restoration and unification. And then you got physical revival and national ingathering. All right. So and then later on, we're going to get into a thing about a monarchy and shepherdry and purification in the temple. All right. So one of the things I like to bring out is this. A lot of times I hear over the years and a few times when people ask me, you know, what my final words would be, and some talks I might have gave in the past, you know, what it take, you know, and usually ask the question, what it takes for all Israel to be united and come together. And my answer was always this: it's never in our power to unite. It's in our power to get along. So if we share love for one another, then that's in our power to do that. But the glory of gathering, as we read in the prophecy, is only going to be done by the Creator. And the key factor is this: we're not even going to be united until we come into the land divided. We coming into the land divided, and we're going to be only united once we get into the land. And once certain things are set up as we get into this prophecy. So when people, you know, and I hear it, and it's, you know, it's kind of, you know, a little bit, you know, depressing to me sometimes when people say, well, you know, why we can't unite? Why this camp here? Why this congregation here? Why is that? Well, we all can't live in one house. That's number one. Number two, we didn't come here on vacation. You know, I mean, that's the other area. We didn't come here on vacation, and it was our disunity that got us out the land. So we couldn't stay united within the land. Then, you know, we're going to unite outside the land in that sense. So, and another area is that this is the Creator's glory to bring us back together. That's His glory. And it says to all the nations. And we're going to finish this out. Just going to maybe I'll talk at the end. All right. Continue.
And it reads, verse 23. That's where we at, right?
All right. Well, you can pick it up from 22.
22. Reads, and I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Yisrael, and one king shall be king to them all. And they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all.
Keep going.
Neither shall they defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions, but I will save them out of all their dwelling places, wherein they have sinned, and will cleanse them. So shall they be my people, and I will be their God.
Now, right there, 1 second. All right. And I find it very important. Said, you can't sanctify yourself. You can't clean yourself. And then say you're acceptable for God. You know, what I had a problem with a lot of guys used to say over time in the past that we're supposed to represent God. I said, what? If anything, you make a presentation, you know, I mean, you could represent some kind of ideology of holiness.
Godliness, right?
But representing God?
Never.
Then you know, I mean, how could you represent God? And I hear that I wouldn't speak on it if it wasn't hearing prominent individual teachers say it over the years, that, you know, we're supposed to represent God. And the place I grew up under, BINAH, that's a phrase we never used, because somebody would come pretty much like I'm doing now and tell you, what you mean you're going to represent God? Who is you to represent God? All right? When we read in the prophecy that, you know, they came in God's name and God said, I didn't send them. So to even say you are a messenger of God, that is still, you know, I mean, a real thin line to walk. Because if you're a messenger of the Creator, did he commission you to be the messenger? And we're supposed to be a light to the world. A light doesn't say anything. It just shines in its spot. It actually shines in its spot. And we always say in BINAH, we try to win friends and influence people to a better way of life and a better lifestyle. That means that we're not talking about live my life, but find a lifestyle that the Creator wants you to live. It's not really doing exactly everything I do, but try to do, everything the Creator wants you to do. So that's what we try to push more. So a lot of times when the Creator called say my messenger, then this guy's really commissioned to be a messenger of the Creator. And if it said thus and thus spoke the Lord, then he's commissioned just to say thus and thus spoke the Lord. But for us everyday people, when we say, and even then they don't represent the Creator, they're presenting a word from the Creator, which is an important thing to keep us in a more humble state, pretty much. Because we read just right now that he said he will cleanse them. And then it said, so they shall be my people and I will be their God. You mean tell me in our state, even though Israel, we say it's God's chosen. We say Israel is God's firstborn. But can God use us at the state we at as a people? And then we're going to pick up the 24th verse. We have four more verses.
Verse 24, and my servant Dawid shall be king over them, and they shall all, and they all shall have one shepherd. They shall also walk in mine ordinances and observe my statutes and do them. And they shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Yaakov my servant, wherein your fathers dwelt, and they shall dwell therein, they and their children and their children's children forever. And Dawid my servant shall be their prince forever. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will establish them and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forever. My dwelling place also shall be over them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And the nation shall
Mishkani, which is the formula of a tabernacle, which is a little different. I'll speak on it in the end. Keep going. The last verse.
And the nation shall know that I am Yehudah that sanctify Yisrael, or my sanctuary shall be in the midst of them forever. Hallelujah.
All right. One of the great things is that Ezekiel giving them hope, but it didn't say we're going to be doing that second commonwealth for Ezra and Nehemiah. We know that he wasn't talking about that. The temple that Ezekiel described, we know they didn't build it like that, though they was able to communicate with Ezekiel during that particular time, about how it should be done. Ezekiel was talking about sometime in the future where there'll be no more captivity, where we don't have to face that same kind of problems anymore. That we'll be sanctified permanently to the Creator, and we won't be having all these different ideologies and concepts, and problems. One of the things that I'd like to bring out is this here. Ezekiel, Daniel, Ananias, Azariah, Mishael, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the guys, they commonly call. And different guys, Nehemiah, Ezra, Joshua, the high priest. Every one of those guys I mentioned, none of them forgot what days to worship. None of them forgot what the law was. And I mentioned prominent guys. And you read even during the Second Commonwealth, when the people seen the second temple finally built, that those that remember the first, that means people lived long enough to see the first temple before it was destroyed in its glory, and see this next one built that looks very, very, lower class compared to the first one. So when we talk about a restoration for the nation of Israel, it's the Creator that actually going to fully restore us to our former glory, not us ourselves. All we used to say in BINAH is that you know, get your act together and get in line and stay in step and dust off your clothes, and be prepared to march. So that's all we could do. Make preparation to be a vessel that the Creator was willing to use. And even if we're not qualified, is our, said, who gonna return? We have this expression, those that's wholly determined in righteousness. Not saying you're righteous, but you determined to get there. And so, if anything, when I say Wayigash is a family reunion, Ezekiel, how it correlates with the Sidra, is that you got Joseph separated from his brothers. Joseph got the majority of the tribes. Joseph looks more bigger and powerful than his brothers at this time. But the spiritual essence is that you're going to have a Davidic line, a line from David that the king has, that the Creator has set up. And that, David, who's a man after God's own heart. So they're going to talk about sanctification, cleaning up, and then they're going to talk about not only that, but unification. And then they're going to talk about leadership. And then they're going to talk about a place of worship that can be for all of us and not just for some of us. And the worship going to be exactly the same. So we should feel enthused that the Creator can work with us in a strange land, but we're going to see the greatness of the glory until, if we're fortunate enough to be back in that number. And as I used to say in old days, when that saints come marching in. So I hope you got something out of what I said. Any mistakes been my own. And I think I'm supposed to address it, I think, was about why Yaakov didn't pick a wife for all his children. But I mentioned about the first actual matchmaker before was Pharaoh. Well, Abraham sent for a wife amongst his people, so he had criteria. For Yitzchak, he sent for a wife for Isaac. And we know that Jacob wound up going to the people back there to get him a wife, but that was it. And we know that Jacob was going down to Egypt. Isaac was never allowed to go down to Egypt. And one of the things to bear in mind too when we get to the end of Genesis, very sheet, is that Isaac himself was never allowed to even leave the land during a famine. So consider, he'd been dead 10 years. The famine, so if he was dead 10 years, that means he died, when things were still going pretty good at that particular time. And so it stands to reason that later on, the terms for land flowing with milk and honey comes up later on as we move forward. So like I said, once again, any mistakes been my own, any questions, you can leave it. And if I get a chance, I'll look over it. If I can answer it, I'll try my best to answer it. And discuss the chapters, go over them, and see where we fit in. Because community means common unity, but the common unity is that I respect you, you respect me, and I have a love for you, and you have a love for me. And to unite for us, Israel, that's God's work. But that's it. Shalom Aleichem.
Hallelujah. There was also a sister out there in this past week's chat when you was going over Miquates. Beautiful Forever, I believe she had a question, but I can't remember it. I didn't write it down, but it was in the chat, so I would have to go back. Or Beautiful Forever, if you see this, leave your question in the comment section. Sometimes in the chat, that's while it's going on live. Sometimes Prince Zurishaddai might miss that, but if you leave it in the comment section under the videos, after the videos is up, not live while it's going on live, but under the videos, after the video is posted, then he sees those questions and he's able to answer them. I have a question for you.
Yes.
And this is a discussion that Chief Abdiel had with a brother by the name of Dwight, in which the brother Dwight was trying to, in some terms, try to say that Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68 is not speaking about us as
Ships.
a people, ships,
Yes.
and us being brought, and us as the so-called Negro, the West Indian or whatever, being brought to through the transatlantic slave trade. That's the gist of the conversation. There's much more that was said, but he's trying to disprove that Deuteronomy 28:68 is speaking about us in general, but the particular argument that he made is about 28:68, and when it reads, it says, "Where Eshivka Yahoah Misraim Ba'aniyot." So that word, Ba'aniyot.
That's the ship. I mean, it ships, and it also means it could be used in the sense of like an oppression, almost like an oppression, but mostly it means a ship, a boat, and that's the term is used. And sometimes books might translate as galleys because he mostly was slaves was tied and chained to the ships in the bottom and row and use it, as oarsmen. But I agree with Chief Abdiel, Zion, like they say.
Right.
To that. So I don't see why would the brother have a problem with it, in that area. Now, to be definitive about Egypt just is a Greek term that they applied to it, which meant, bondage a hard place, but we know it's meant, Mizraim, that's what we refer to in the scriptures, a land of borderlands, so between, borders, and dual borders. So I really don't understand any further, other than I'm sure knowing Abdiel that he handled himself good in that kind of discussion, judging from some of the things I've seen. So I don't see anything else further I need to add to that, because we're the only one as a people, that was continually supposed to be exiled and mingle. And then we just read here about amongst the nations. Now, you're talking about, it's different when people say, well, we got people from every place in every nation. But when you got a people in every nation, then that's problematic. It's a difference, because you can have people from everywhere in every nation, but you have one people from somewhere in every nation, then that's the issue of problems right there. And so that's why we talk about the bringing us from various nations around the world, because they're talking about one particular people, and they talking about a bunch of people that decide to go different places.
Right. And also, when you read it in context, because the brother's argument was that Ba'aniyot means sorrows, in your sorrows, and he used two references. I believe one is in Ecclesiastes.
Yes,
chapter 2:9, I think. Yeah.
But that's a stretch meaning, because because you're gonna have words that have a stretch meaning,
right?
And things like essay itself, and most of us from Brooklyn know about Manhattan, where the Delancey Street, and they got this place called, they spell it ESSE, I think X. K Essex.
Yeah. With
X
at the end, I think X at the end, right?
All right. Well, anyway, in Hebrew, it's spelled Ayin, Samek, and Kuf. All right. And that's the word is especially when they ask about the occupation of Joseph brothers, and it's talking about your occupation. Now, occupation and jobs is a little bit different, but that word is used, but it also means business. It means business. So you can say, okay, what is a job? Then you say avodah is a job, but then when you say asset, that's more like osek is more like an occupation or business, what you actually pursue. So there's no words that has the exact same meaning. Two different meanings. You can have some words that are gonna have similar meanings, overlapping meanings, but it's not the same. Like we just finished the thing about God dwelling amongst us, and use the word mishkani. A mishkan by itself means a tabernacle, but it's supposed to be a dwelling place for God, the dwelling amongst us in this space, particular space. But the root word Shekinah itself, it's actually is a divine dwelling. But then you got the term for God. God is actually a place that you could live or sojourn or whatever it is, but you're dwelling in some place, and you got the word yoshev, which means sitting, but it also means to settle in some spots. So you notice there has sometimes overlapping meanings, but that's not the first primary meaning of the word. And you're gonna find that in the Hebrew. So if you ain't careful, you can slide that off with a lot of people that's not maybe familiar with the language and say, over here it's used here. And I gave an example of Zonah, when they talk about Tamar, that was Yehudah how he thought it, but the term is used for Quadesha, and then Zonah comes up again in reference to when she's pregnant, 3 months pregnant. But when we look at also the word Zonah, now it means a harlot, but it also means to go astray. And we find that in the book of Numbers, when it's talking about the zeus, So you're gonna have terms where a word might have its primary meaning, and then it's used a stretch meaning. And when we talk about adultery or purification, when we talk about worshiping other gods, we become unclean because of the worship of other gods. So you're talking about sanctifying yourself to be clean because strictly the worship. Now, suppose you just say, all I did was just pray. I didn't rub myself or dab myself or this and that and the other. So things that have a stretch meaning, but this may not be its core meaning.
Got you. So in other words, sometimes the words can have a secondary meaning, but it's like a stretch. It's a stretch meaning. You meaning like you could you stretch it to the limits of what the word can mean.
Right. And then you got words that's like two words, like I always use this thing like Lama and Madua. Madua, you got two words in there from the word Yehudah, which is like a knowledge or knowing something. Right. And then Ma is what? All right. So now when you say what, and we translate as why, but the why we mean now is that you give me some information when I say Madua. When I say Lama, for what? It's like saying, what you do that for, man? I don't want to hear anything. All right. But that means why too, why you did it. Right. And so in English, it might not be always clear, but in Hebrew, they have these clear distinctions.
Would it also be the same for the word shalom, which has so many different meanings?
Right. Yeah. Well, and because of the concept, when there's peace, that means everything is complete because of the concept. So that's why we translate it as peace. I give you another example too. In Hebrew, the word Cain. That's something we use all the time. Cain. Right. Cain, we translate as yes, but it's like saying so. It's like saying so. We don't have you answer in Hebrew in the affirmative. But the Cain comes from the word, is a derivative of the root nakam, which means prepared.
Got you.
So I'm saying, so when people, get into some little, nitpicking in certain Hebrew words, sometimes it's necessary, and then sometimes it's something that's divert from the actual concept. So, and usually how a word is used first, that's usually how you find out what's the core meaning of it. And then you have what you call biblical Hebrew, which is classic. And then you got modern Hebrew, which I was fortunate to meet the grandson of the guy that actually introduced modern Hebrew to Israel.
So one last question. You read many books, many Tanakhs, and many I would say Torah, right, in your life. And any of the translations that you've seen, on any of the Bibles that you've seen, has the word ba'aniyot ever been translated as sorrow, or has it always been translated as ships? Well,
that means I had to remember every place that the word is ever used at. So I'm not. I'm
talking
not.
about specifically in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68. Have you?
Oh,
And I
that,
know you, and I know that you've always read that chapter every year. You read it every year, maybe 2 or 3 times a year.
It's mostly with ships, and it's rare. I've seen it as galleys in some books. You know,
right.
Galley, but
it will mean the same thing, right?
It's you're rowing.
Right. Hallelujah. So there you have it, a definitive. This is from someone who's been Nasik been studying Hebrew for almost 50 years now, or over 50 years now. So I just would and he sat down with, and this is someone who has sat down with some of the teachers of who we call like grandmaster Hebrew teachers in our community. So he sat down with Chief Barak, who was later known as Nasi Barak, and he taught Moreh Mishael, right? And he's also sat down, I believe you sat down with Adon Jerubbaal, right?
Yeah, Prince.
Prince Jerubbaal. So Prince Jerubbaal is Nasi Barak's Hebrew teacher. So there you have it. And he and this is people that been reading these things in Hebrew for years.
Well, I had some dynamite professors. Matter of fact, one of my professors I had for a lot of courses in college, which is
you
well
also
known.
took it in college. I forgot about that.
Was he was a professor, Rabbi Nathaniel Goldberg. He got a Passover Haggadah is out there, and he used to be a professor. I'm sure he might have passed on by now because it's been since the early 70s, 72, and he used to be the head of the Hebrew department in Brooklyn College at one time, and he was a rabbi. He wrote a Passover Haggadah. He got a Hebrew English dictionary. And so I was able to be exposed. And my Hebrew 1 teacher was a grammatic teacher that was really, really good. Got a scholarship to go to Hebrew University. He was a young guy. He was a professor at Brooklyn College, and he got a scholarship to go to Hebrew University in Israel because he was good in grammar. And that was the early stages in the 70s when a lot of people still didn't have Hebrew down pat in the land. And like I said, down here in Florida, I attend the same spot where Rabbi Eliezer ben Yehudah, who's the grandson of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yehudah, who introduced Hebrew back into the country, the state of Israel. And his son, which is Rabbi Eliezer's son, which is the other Rabbi Eliezer father, is Ehud ben Yehudah, which is, I can show you right here. It's pocket dictionary right here. I didn't go far.
Ben Yehudah's, that's what we call it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I could get some help every now and then. Right.
Yeah, I would. Maybe we might need to start a Hebrew, a beginner's Hebrew class, and maybe an intermediary Hebrew class with you, because I know you got time on your hands. So.
Well, I got time on my hands, but that area, I would have to polish up, because I one thing for sure, when it comes to language, I hate to give misinformation.
Gotcha.
And to Tanakh, I hate to give misinformation as well. Right. But to Tanakh, I many other people that could, straighten it out. If I don't straighten it out, other people that's well learned out there will straighten it out.
Right.
But in Hebrew, unfortunately, I've seen some information given from videos and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
Fortunately, for some of our people.
Right. I have another question. It's in Hebrew, right? And this would be my last question. Why is it that, all right, for example, today's portion, right? I would say the way I was taught, the wow will have that W sound. So I would say Wayigash, like what we're going over, Haftarah Wayigash. But right. a lot of times in the European community, it will be Wayigash. They will pronounce, or they will enunciate that wow as a V sound. What is the difference, and why is that? And in your opinion, what is the proper pronunciation?
Well, it's definitely a W sound, but that's a definite. That's hands down.
And ancient,
that's some of the
ancient Hebrew.
That's some of the basic stuff I learned, in the grammar class in Hebrew 1 in Brooklyn College when it was really, really tight back in those days. Because a lot of people from yeshivas were in Brooklyn College back then.
Right.
And the professor was grammarian. Now, what it was is a lot of European, mainly from, I guess, the German area, whatever case is, had problems with W sounds, and some of us that's older, remember, they'll say, but you want, Beethoven, and we used to hear that, and we used to say that was some of the, the European Jewish people would say. And in Israel, it's still utilized today as a V sound. But the problem is for a person that don't speak every day. Now, if I speak it every day, like in English, if you mispronounce certain things in English, I will understand you because that's my first language. I'm familiar with it. So I could understand if a person mispronounced certain things. But if I'm trying to learn the language and words I may not use often, and you got homonyms in every language, right. I need to know exactly, the distinct pronunciation, just like everybody say, I'm around circles, we mostly say, Kuf with a K instead of Hu with a Q.
Right.
All right. And those different pronunciations is helps me understand when if I say if the name Yitzchak, how I would spell it.
Yitzchak. Right.
You know what I mean? So you got to say, all right, for a guy that don't speak it every day, and you had to do independent studies, it makes it easier if you have a unique pronunciation. So it's 22 letters, and it was 22 unique pronunciations of those letters. And I always used to joke with people in Hebrew 1 when I say I need. All right, is I'm saying I, or I am a poor man. Now, 1, I need, spelled with an olive. The same vowels underneath it, but for ani, for I, first person pronoun nominative case would be olive, nun, and then a yod. And underneath the olive, you have, a kataf, pataf, and you have, a karik, but the yod on the side is called karik malay, which means a full karik, as opposed to one that doesn't have the yod going to the side. But you had the same vowel system under the letters ayin, nun, with a yod, which means a poor man. So most people would pronounce it the same, but ayin has had a subtle speaking. It's not silent. You only have pretty much what you consider aleph is silent. So those are different grammatical things that everybody say aleph and ayin is silent today. That's what they always say, but and technically it's not.
Got you. Toda about Nasik for that information. I'm still going to put the pressure on you, at least a beginner's Hebrew class, aleph, beit, certain simple verbs and words that you could use on a daily basis. We got to link up on that.
Yeah, that's guy from Sure Racial Minds. That's more what he like to do all the right anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, we could do something like that and give it to the people because they've been waiting for a Hebrew class from D.C.B. and maybe we could.
He's there.
Yeah, you're right. I'll work something out with him. Try to work something.
In-house or right there. You got a lot of guys in-house. I'm I'm more stickler for, grammar, long vowels, short vowels. Katapim and stuff like that, the shwaim and stuff, I'm more of a stickler for those things because when you learn to dig through the grammar, you go study and encounter new terms and words on your own and figure it out. If you don't study in that kind of approach, the rules of the structure of the language, then what happens is you might use words out of context, or you won't recognize a new word. You have to wait till you hear it again. And then biblical Hebrew, some words is only used one time, and in biblical Hebrew, it's a lot harder because it's more construct state.
Hallelujah. Toda Abba Nasik, thank you once again for the insight and for the wisdom. Praying that the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth, will continue to be with you and bless you, protect you, and guide you. And to continue to have these great lessons. I always get little nuggets at the end. That's why I ask you the questions, because this is how we're going to preserve our history and how we're going to get to build and edify ourselves. If we don't ask questions, and people, this is for everyone out there, if you don't ask questions, then you will never know, right? If you don't ask questions, then you will never know. So it's good to ask questions. As they told me as I was growing up, no question is a stupid question. And
you only get stupid answers.
Yeah, you only get stupid answers. That's it. So we pray that the creator of heaven and earth will continue to be with you all. Shalom, shalom. Hallelujah. May the Most High God bless us all. Hallelujah.
Yes. Hallelujah. Ta-ra.
Ptolemaic throne is weak. Not only is he weak, if you're familiar with some of Antiochus's
To us at this moment. Hey, shalom, 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 family. Everyone out there. Shalom to everyone out there on the Uzialewi channel on YouTube, and also on my Facebook page. If you're listening to us at this moment, if you join us tonight is the I guess you could say is the eve of Hanukkah, right? And is the first night of Hanukkah, and we are going to go into a little bit of the history. And I have the pleasure to introduce my brother, who always joins me whenever I need him, my brother Chief Avdiel Ben Levi, who's been doing a lot of big things lately. I'm so proud of him right now, of some of the things he's doing right now, representing the nation, representing Israel in a positive way, making big connections and all those sorts of big things. So he's joining me tonight to talk a little bit about Hanukkah and the tradition of Hanukkah and what it means to us. How are you, Chief? Shalom, shalom, Chief. Can you hear me?
Sleeka. I'm doing good, Chief. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. I want to say first and foremost, giving all honor, all praise to the Holy One of Israel,
Hallelujah.
God of our ancient forefathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, the true and the living God, even the Most High God. In the spirit of our teacher, Chief of Chiefs, I also want to say he is the creator, maker, owner, and possessor of all that there is.
Amen.
And to him do we owe all honor and glory. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. So before we get started, I want the people online, whether you be on Facebook or whether you be on the Uzialewi channel, I want you all to begin to share the link This is going to be a very interesting night, very interesting topic. We're going to be going through some history of that time and what was happening during the time of the Maccabees and what the significance of Hanukkah is from an Israelite point of view, right? And my brother Chief Abdiel, who is a historian, who is a Hebrew teacher, Hebrew scholar, will be helping us to parse through some of this stuff, some of these scriptures, some of this history, which is very important to us. And a lot of this history sometimes is left out, and people don't read through it or don't acknowledge it. But I think that it's very important for us to acknowledge this history and to let everybody know what this history is all about. So I want everyone to please share, hit that share button, send it out to everyone, let them know that we are out here and we are talking about Hanukkah tonight, the first night of Hanukkah, or the observance of Hanukkah, and what it's all about. So, Chief, first I want to start out by asking you, right? The first thing I want to ask you is the Apocrypha, right, where the story of Hanukkah is written. Was the Apocrypha ever, I know that it was in Greek before, right? Was there ever an original version of the Apocrypha in Hebrew?
Oh,
Do you know, would you know that history?
Oh, absolutely. And I want to be very, very accurate. So I want to make a mild discrepancy, or I want to make a mild correction. The original language of the Apocrypha, the earliest manuscripts that we have, the Apocrypha, is actually in Aramaic. Most
Aramaic.
people
Thank
know
you.
of the Greek copies. Most people are obviously more familiar with it by its Greek name, but we do actually have very, very old manuscripts of the Apocrypha, and it's written entirely in Aramaic. In fact, a large part of that which was recorded in Aramaic has been reduplicated on the Sepharia app. So if you have the Sepharia app, or if you go to Sepharia, I believe it's .org online, you can click and you can look for the Apocrypha, and you'll find all of the books of the Apocrypha in the original Aramaic right there.
Okay, so on the Sepharia app, Aramaic. So Aramaic is actually a language that we began to speak when we came out of Babylon. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Immediately following the Babylonian captivity, we come into the Persian captivity, where Ezra the scribe introduces us to the Aramaic square script. It's at this point in history that we transition from speaking the old Hebrew into what we refer to today as Aramaic.
Okay, so then my question to you is why maybe some Israelites don't accept the Apocrypha? Do you know some of the reasons why? And has the Apocrypha been tampered with, or it might be some things in it that might not be, as we would say, kosher, being that it, I guess it went through Christian hands and they published it, and some of their books, mainly when you see is mainly like in the King James version of an Apocrypha. What is your whole take on that?
That's an excellent question. So, when we talk about the Apocrypha in its original form and the reason why it was ultimately rejected from the biblical canon, there contains a great deal of discrepancy or unreliability of some of the redactors of the text. Because of some of the authors of the text, those who brought it to final edit are in question. And then some of the contents of various books of the Apocrypha, some of it is also in question. For those reasons, it definitely did not make the biblical canon. On top of that, the criteria for making the biblical canon, first and foremost, is that its contents stem from an era where there was still divine inspiration among the prophets of the Almighty. So if you notice, every canonical book of the Old Testament is from a period where there was divine inspiration, where there was someone actually communing with the Creator on some level. Even down to Ezra's age, our oral tradition speaks of something called the Bat Kol, which is the still small voice, which is a slight remnant of the spirit of prophecy still existing. But right after the Persian captivity, and when the Greek captivity begins, prophecy as we know it ceases to exist. And this is in accordance with the book of Daniel chapter 9, where it speaks about the prophecy of 70 weeks. And after 62 weeks, even prophecy and vision shall come to an end, which by that time period, we know we're talking about the Greco-Roman captivity. But first and foremost, we're talking about the Greeks.
Okay,
And go ahead.
no, go ahead. You could
So
finish out your thought.
the Catholic Church decided that they would pick up what we put down. And again, the only reason why these books did not make the biblical canon is because they're not coming from an era where we still had divine inspiration. That's number one. Then number two, some of the contents of some of the books of the Apocrypha are unreliable in the sense that we have no contemporary source to confirm nor deny the author's words. And by the way, we do have something that we call literary criticism that takes place when it comes to the composition or the compilation of the biblical text that our ancestors employed. So because we have no fact checker to fact check these documents to make sure that they are what they're supposed to be, then we have to say for a number of reasons these books were rejected. And because they were rejected, the Roman Catholic Church picks them up, and then they begin to insert their Judeo-Christian ideas of the Bible into it. And then that revolutionizes the look of what is known today as the Apocrypha. It originally stemmed from the Greek term apocryphal, which means hidden. One of the reasons why it takes on that name hidden is that for many years, those who wrote it, they deemed it necessary to hide it from the adversary because they felt that the contents contained large portions of our history that if the adversary were to get too near to it, they can understand too much about our contemporary history. And remember, one thing is always true, no matter what era you're in, knowledge is power. Therefore, beware of those you empower with knowledge. So with that being said, when we put it down, the Catholic Church picked it up. No different than when our ancestors put down the Torah, the European Jew picks it up.
Are there any references to any stories of the Apocrypha in the book of, for example, like the book of Josephus or in the Talmud or any one of those books? Do they mention any of the history or the stories that we find in the Apocrypha today?
So you definitely have parts of the oral tradition that mention some of the stories. Most of the stories that you're going to find are the historical stories in the book of Maccabees. So you're going to find mention to Mattathias and his children. Obviously, you're going to find mention to Judah. But many of the other stories you're not going to find. No, you don't really find them. The only books that you really do find reference to is First and Second Maccabees.
First and Second Maccabees. So for what we know, and not only through the Apocrypha or the oral tradition or Josephus, we could pretty much say that the book of Maccabees is a historical, it's a historical fact that this happened.
Oh, absolutely, bar none. You could literally line up the books of First and Second Maccabees to a T with the historical record and what it reflects historically. The books of First and Second Matthew, bar none, are historical documents.
Maccabees, you mean Maccabees?
Yes, Maccabees.
You said Matthews.
Maccabees.
So, okay, so let's set the scene because this is a very important part of our history. I have something here. It says, set in the tumultuous years of 175 through 143 BCE, First Maccabees narrates the history of the revolt against the Seleucid rule in Judea led by Judas Maccabeus and his brothers. So let's speak about the the Seleucid rule, or where that originates from, the Seleucid rule, and where that whole idea of these rulers come from, stemming from the time of Alexander the Great. Give us a little bit of that history.
Okay, now I certainly can do that off my mind, but I also have a PowerPoint. Do you
Okay.
want
Oh,
brief
let's do it.
analysis and then go into the PowerPoint, or
Oh, you go right into the PowerPoint,
you
definitely.
already know? You already know. Definitely. So here we go. I'm going to open up my share screen as soon as you give me that sharing ability.
I got you. Give me 1 second here, all right?
Okay, take your time.
I have to go to the big computer and give you that accessibility. Should have made you a co-host from the very beginning. Chief, try it now. I think you should be good.
Okay, let me see. There we go. Yep. There we go. And when you can see my screen, just let me know.
I see it.
Okay, excellent. All right. All right, all right, all right. Okay. So I've entitled this particular PowerPoint, The True History of Hanukkah by Morey Abdiel Ben Levi. There's a lot of things that people assume about the stories of Hanukkah, but piece by piece, as we begin to gather together or galvanize the pieces of the puzzle, you'll notice that there's quite a few aspects of Hanukkah and even the Maccabean period in history that a lot of us take on face value without enough credible or verifiable research. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a couple of moments as I share a couple of slides within the next 15 to 20 minutes. But I definitely want to say that there is possibly one huge aspect of the Hanukkah tradition that many of us took for granted. And in more ways than one, we're about to see that unless we are privy to certain things, then there are aspects of Hanukkah that we're speaking of that are actually not rooted in the text. And you'll see what that means when we get there. So let me open up my first slide. And as always, we begin by giving praise. So I'm going to start off and I'm going to say hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Chief Uzziel for opening up your platform to me.
Hey, thank you for
also,
coming on, man.
thank you.
You always, we look out for each other, I guess,
Absolutely. Iron sharpens iron for sure.
Hallelujah.
All right. So this particular history of what we are calling Hanukkah, which tonight is the first night of Hanukkah, it can be found in one book and one book only. These are the books of First and Second Maccabees in the Apocrypha. Hence my screen, which says Sefer Maccabeem 1 or Aleph, the book of the Maccabees, Aleph, the first book of the Maccabees. Here we go. Let's talk about some history that leads up to the actual event that we celebrate today. As Alexander the Great dies in 323 BCE, his empire is divided between his four generals. That is Ptolemy, Seleucus, Cassander, and Lysimachus. By the way, this actually is mentioned in the book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, chapter 8, it talks about the horn that splits into four. That horn that arose was the horn of Yavan, the horn of Greece. And its king, its leader, is Alexander the Great. And as history records, and as we clearly now know and understand, upon the death of Alexander the Great, four of his military generals take control for his empire as it was in his day, the surviving remnants of his empire. They vie and fight among one another for all of the places and spaces that Alexander the Great conquered. Mind you, this is recorded in the Torah no less than at least 200 to 300 years before that event takes place. That's very important to mention. It's highly important to mention that Daniel, who prophesied during the era of Babylon, we're talking about Nebuchadnezzar takes over the Babylonian Empire, sacks the city of Jerusalem, besieges it, and takes the city in 586 before the Common Era. Daniel's prophecy begins contemporary with that takeover. And Daniel, as a prophet, his ministry is between that time, 586 BC, all the way until just before we step into the beginnings of the 5th century BCE, which is the 400s. So he has a long reign. Remember, Daniel spoke for a long time, prophesied for a long time. But my point is, from the time that his prophecy begins, 586 BC, until the time of 331 BCE, Alexander the Great, you have at least 250 years that have passed. And 250 years before Alexander the Great dies and his empire is split among his top 4 generals, the biblical prophet Daniel prophesied something that would occur 250 years before it occurred. So while we're in this moment, let's feel very free to put great respect on the Torah and its annals of recordation in terms of recording history. Yes, the Torah is also a history book in the sense that the goal of the Torah is to be a moral guide, but it contains great histories that to this day cannot be contradicted. And that's in fact, right. The only thing modern science has been able to do with the histories of the Torah is slowly but surely begin to confirm them. Let's also note that. Of the 4 Hellenistic kingdoms or Hellenistic generals, 2 fought for control over Israel. That would be the Ptolemaic Empire, which is the Ptolemaic king of Egypt, and the Seleucid Empire in Syria. This is referred to in the book of Daniel as the king of the south and the king of the north. We're talking Daniel chapter 11. This entire series of events that begins with the takeover of Alexander the Great's kingdom by his 4 generals, that entire historical scenery plays out in the book of Daniel chapter 11. And midway, there's a focus on primarily what's called the king of the south, which is Egypt, and the king of the north, which is the Seleucid Empire of Syria. And again, the Ptolemaic Empire of Egypt being the king of the south. The separate kingdoms flourished in education, but there was internal rivalries that led to the fall of each to Rome eventually. Pompey made Syria a Roman province in 64 BC, and Cleopatra was the last Ptolemaic emperor in 51 to 30 BC.
In Egypt, right.
But here's something that I definitely want to emphasize because I think it's necessary to point out.
Speak on it.
One of the underlying reasons that you're going to have war between the Ptolemaic kings of Egypt and the Seleucid kings of Syria is because Alexander's generals that assume kingship in Egypt, remember, when you come to throne on the soil of Kemet or Egypt, you're not just king, you're declared a god.
That's right. Pharaoh. That's
Pharaoh.
right.
In the language of the Medu Neter, the Nisut, which is the word for king, he becomes a Neter. He becomes a god, and he is worshipped. And in fact, Chief, as you and I have visited the Metropolitan Museum of Art, when you go into the outdoor corridor where you see all of the colonnades and the great columns in the Colosseum that was built, the Roman style one, you'll notice that carved out on the cartouche or the chenu where the king's name is, you're seeing the name Pharaoh or Per-Ah. per in the Medo Neter, and what we call Pharaoh in English, going back to eventually the word Pharaoh from the Greek. This began or was revitalized with the Greco-Roman kings that assumed kingship in Egypt. So the problem that the Seleucid Empire is now having, because mind you, part of the reason why there's going to be internal strife between these two super powerhouses is that every king of the Ptolemaic lineage is going to be declared a god simply because he's sitting on the Egyptian throne. On top of that, in the ancient day, Egypt was one of the major capitals of trade in the ancient world and trade and commerce. So what are they warring for? Control of trade and commerce, which is money, and control of spirituality. He who controls the two of those controls the world. And this is nothing new. Even as the Torah says, that which is that which shall be. That which has been done is that which shall be done, and there is nothing new under the sun.
That's right.
So these two kings perfectly understood that to control the masses, I had to have power of hand, might of hand. To the kings of the ancient world, that was translated no different than it translates today to the presidents and rulers of America and the West. They believe they have to have a stockpile of money. They also want to have a monopoly on quote unquote religion. So that is the essence of the internal strife that is occurring between those two. They're vying for the control of lands, money, and the then known world, and they're vying for control of people, which from time immemorial has come through what we call quote unquote religion. So that is the essence of the beginning of the war that takes place between these two mighty kings of Alexander's crumbling empire. Now, as you can see from my screen, as the empire is divided, I want everyone to notice that the Ptolemaic kings actually don't have that much land that they traverse and cover.
Right.
But if you notice this, the Seleucid king,
He has a lot.
Vastness of his land.
Yeah.
He has a lot.
What's that? That's like all the way to India. He got from like the Euphrates to India.
He has from the border of the Black and Caspian Sea, which is the northwest tip of Mesopotamia, all the way to upper India, coming darn near to the borders of Asia or China.
China, right.
That's serious.
And he still wants more.
He still wants more. Whereas, well, there's a reason why he wants more.
Right.
And I'll get into that reason in a couple of seconds. Whereas the Ptolemaic king, he simply has control over Egypt and Israel. But don't let me fool you by the word simply. Because remember, in the ancient world, there were many civilizations that rose and impacted the world that became great.
Like Egypt.
But even to this day,
right,
no two nation states have achieved such a long-lasting name throughout the annals of history as the nations of Egypt and Israel. They're still lauded today in historical spaces all over the world. They're still the subject of the hottest debates and controversy in all of the halls of academia around the globe. So while Seleucus has a vast empire, as it were, he still does not have the nucleus of the world's power and authority and quote unquote religion. He does not have control over what is called the Holy Land and the land of Egypt.
Kemet.
And what everyone must know is that in the ancient world, before you have an airplane, before you have a car, and before you have a train, people are traveling around on horses, camels. Some people are traveling around on donkeys, even though it's known that you don't want to take a long trip with a donkey. They're not really built for that.
Right.
So, but the point is, how are people getting from point A to point B? they have to traverse through a particular body mass or land mass. Now, I want to also include that you obviously had people that were seafarers. You know, from the dawn of civilization, you can see that even the unification of ancient Kemet by Narmer, you can see a scenery where there's huge ships coming from Mesopotamia involved in the unification of the ancient Egyptian empire under its first king Narmer. So you have people traveling by sea and you have people traveling by land. You have no one traveling by air. Why is that important?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you want to go from Asia to Africa, what two nation states are absolutely important during that transition? The land of Canaan and the land of Egypt.
Right.
They are literally the gateway between Asia and Africa. That means that geographically, the position of the land of Canaan and Egypt historically has always been extremely sought after, simply because they first and foremost were a gateway to Asia or from Asia to Africa or from Africa, which is very, very important when we understand the historical record.
Absolutely.
Because these two continents achieved a lot of trade, not just in terms of commerce and resources, but also intellect.
It makes sense why most of the wars of the world were fought over Jerusalem naturally, because everyone, sought it because it was the Holy Land.
That's
and
right.
Then Egypt because it's that gateway to a whole nother world.
Right. That's right.
Right.
So among all the four kings, and I want to definitely give this a little bit more time before I move on.
Okay.
So among Alexander's four generals, it is the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire that rise the greatest. You can even look at the landmass. The landmass tells you the extent of their might and power, because look at their two counterparts, their two rivals, Lysimachus and Cassander. Look how small the regions are that they govern. And then notice this: the Seleucid Empire, by show of the arrows, begins to usurp authority in those regions. That's what the arrows are showing you. The arrows are showing you that the Seleucid Empire is actually causing expansion into those regions, so that they're taking over those two regions that were ruled by the other two generals. So that the Seleucid Empire takes the territory of the other two generals, and that eventually becomes all of the Seleucid Empire. Very important. The only thing left now is Egypt. And at this time in history, Egypt still has a significant amount of control in the land of Canaan. Why is that? Because of Egypt's ties to Rome. And remember, Rome at this period is emerging as its own nation state. And Rome in our Tanakh is known as Kittim, which is where we see this right here. Again, going back to the book of Daniel, it speaks of ships of Kittim in the 11th chapter, because Rome is on the world scene at this point, and they're also literally on the scene in this rivalry, spectating and watching, just waiting, because we all know who takes the throne next. It's Rome. All right, let's move on. One of the things that the expansion of Alexander's general brought is what we call Hellenism, which is the spread of Greek culture and civilization throughout the then known world. The effect of Hellenism on the nation state known eventually as Judea, which is the land of Canaan in general, but eventually the historical record begins to refer to it as Judea, because that's the last remaining tribe, as we already know through history and even the Bible. The 10 tribes were kicked out of the land, were exiled much earlier by the Assyrian king. And you have remnants of the Levites and remnants of the Judites, so that the entire land is now referred to as Judea. And among the effects of Hellenism in the land of Canaan, one of the effects is that you notice that some among our people begin to embrace Greece in terms of their culture and their heritage. So they're becoming what is known as Hellenized. Hellenized. And this is mostly the upper class among our people.
Right.
Notice there's nothing new under the sun, because to this day, the upper class of our people in the diaspora are so immersed in Western culture to the extent that you want to ask them, do you remember that you're still black?
Right.
Many of us know exactly what I'm talking about.
Uh-huh.
That person that has achieved so much as a black man in America, the Caribbean, and throughout our diaspora, that they begin to lose their identity as black men. And for us who have finally come into the knowledge of who we are, we won't say they lost identity of being an Israelite, because most don't know they're Israelites. But what we still will say is that they lost their sense of identity of relating to the Africans of the diaspora.
Chief, cannot maybe this example would fit that today? Somebody like Candace Owens.
Woo! Oh man. Yes. Yes, I would definitely agree with that. Candace Owens would definitely fit that criteria to a T. She does more to defend white supremacy than she does to uphold the cultural dispositions of Black America.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
You're very welcome. And that's an excellent point. So you have the Hellenization of the upper class among our people and the city dwellers. Then the lower class of our people are represented by a more pious character. These people are called the Hasidim. The Hasidim. Let me take time to point this out. Many of us are exclusively familiar with the term Hasidic or Hasidic because of the European Jew, but let me use this moment in time to remind you of something. Not only did they take your name, Judah, and call themselves Jewish, but even the term Hasidim originally referred to the pious among our people. Don't you know it's from this class that we get the Maccabean monarchy? The Maccabees come from what is referred to as the Hasidim or the Hasidim, the root being chesed in Hebrew, kindness or pious, the pious ones. And this is the lower class. There's always something significant about people who enjoy their lot.
Right.
People who enjoy their lot are usually people that, the more that riches is multiplied, the more that people are never satisfied. The people you usually find content are poor people, to the extent that, if I could use America as an example, when white people roll by the hood, they say, what is this? Is that a Mercedes-Benz parked out the projects? Are they comfortable?
That's exactly
But our
what they
people
say.
have such a powerful and resilient spirit that we can find comfort in some of the places and spaces that would horrify others. Because for us, all we need to still have to maintain spiritual and or cultural identity is a strong sense of a connection to our God, our King, and our Maker.
Right.
We don't need all the riches. And this is not to say that we shouldn't pursue a better way of life financially. Absolutely not. But it is to emphasize the idea that our people are so beautiful in spirit that even being among the lower class, so long as we find our God, to us, to many of us, we're rich.
Spiritually
Go throughout
rich.
the hood. Absolutely. Go throughout the hood.
Yeah.
No matter where you are in Black America, no matter where you are throughout the Caribbean, no matter where you are in the UK, no matter where you are in Canada, no matter where you are in the African diaspora, notice that our people are content in the lowliest of spaces and places.
That's right. Favelas in Brazil. That's right.
So this is very important because it's the upper class among our people that are more susceptible to embracing Hellenism, whereas the lower class, which has a stronger connection to their God, is not. This is still the same. Go to Flatbush, Brooklyn right now. Drive down Flatbush. Count the churches. Count the churches directly around the corner on Flatbush Avenue.
Right.
Go throughout all of the downtrodden neighborhoods in Queens. Go through all the downtrodden neighborhoods in any of the major urban places in America. and you'll notice the same thing. Black people of lower class, so long as they have their God, they're content. Highly significant. When Judea comes under Seleucid rule, this is about the year 200 before the Common Era, or 200 BCE. These are Syrian Greeks. They're stationed in Syria, but they are Greeks. There's a person by the name of Jason among us. You read about him in the book of the Maccabees.
Mm-hmm.
He purchases or buys the position of high priest. If we were living during the era where the temple stood, our ancestors would have ripped their hair from their scalp at the very notion that the office of high priest is what? That was a huge slap in the face. And mind
Absolutely.
you, the Hellenistic Greek rulers made it possible. They said, yeah, that's okay. To the highest bidder goes the office of high priest.
Right.
Righteousness is no longer a criteria among the Levites to be considered. And remember, first and foremost, you have to be of the lineage of Aharon. And
Absolutely.
then within that lineage, you got to be the cream of the crop in terms of your righteousness, your morale.
Mm-hmm.
But in 200 BCE, when the Seleucids gained control, the office of high priest is now for hire. By the year 175 BCE, which is about roughly 25 years later, Antiochus IV, otherwise known as Antiochus Epiphanes, comes to power. This is a very interesting character throughout history. I'm not going to talk too much about him on this slide because he's on the next slide, but I just want to briefly say this is a very, very interesting character throughout history. A new priest comes to office, Menelaus, at this time also, and replaces Jason and begins to steal temple funds. So Jason ain't that great because he purchased the office of high priest, but it's not document that he's in there stealing from the temple. But Menelaus, the guy who replaces him, now comes into the temple and he's now stealing temple funds. So if you notice, it's degradation by degradation. Each generation is getting worse. Does it sound more familiar?
Yeah.
No different than our era.
That's right.
Listen to rap today, by the way. And you'll for those who are young, go and chart the history of hip hop from where it started and where it is now, and you'll understand by what we mean by degradation. Things just got worse. By the time we come to 168 BCE, and if you notice, the time period is jumping fast now where things get worse. There is a revolt that is led by Jason. This is the former high priest. But it is crushed by Antiochus. Greater Greek scrutiny and encroachment on the autonomy of the land. Extreme outlawing of Torah observance and practice also began to occur. This is a historical item which was found in the land of Israel. This coin is supposed to be a replica of the very image of Antiochus Epiphanes. In fact, if you look very closely, where my arrow is behind Antiochus to the right of the coin here, his name spelled out in Greek, Antiochus.
Yes.
And here it says
Antiochus.
And this is the earliest rendition that we have in history for how he looks. It's in the land of Israel.
Right.
It's not in Greece, which is, he's the Greek. It's not in Syria. It's not in Egypt. It's in Israel. So again, we know Antiochus is historical, for sure. Some people doubt whether or not the Bible is historical or the books of the Apocrypha. Well, while you're questioning those things, just remember, the person that no one disagrees is historical, Antiochus. The earliest record that we have of how he looks was found in the land of Israel. Keep that in mind. Antiochus IV Epiphanes is the little horn mentioned in the book of Daniel, chapter 8 and 11. In the year 200 before the Common Era, Israel was captured from the Ptolemies and came under the control of the Seleucids. Antiochus IV Epiphanes ruled the Seleucid Syria from 175 to 164 BC. So his rule was a little over 10 years. I want to say 11 years. He called himself Epiphanes, which means manifest. God manifest, by the way, because he claimed to be the manifestation of Zeus, the god of Greece at the time, the head of the Grecian pantheon. Now, remember what I said earlier. The beginning of the strife between the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire is that the Ptolemaic Greek kings are kings in Egypt. Anyone that sits on the Egyptian throne is regarded as a god. So the Seleucid kings, while they control a vast amount of land, none of them are regarded as a god. Antiochus said, this stops with me. Because I am God. The buck stops here. I am Antiochus Epiphanes, which translates in the Greek language, I am the manifestation of Zeus.
Right.
So he was saying something that we also know to be well familiar in Christianity. He was God in the flesh.
Right.
And notice something. His enemies, or today we would say his haters, while he called himself Epiphanes, God manifest, his haters called him Epimanes, which translates in the Greek as madman.
Negro, you crazy.
Exactly. And I want to say, why would you think that they call him madman? But it's obvious.
Right.
He regarded himself as a god, and they knew he wasn't a god. So
Right.
behind his back, they would call him madman. But I want to emphasize behind his back, because he literally was a madman. And there are historians and psychologists that take a look at history. The people looking into history are not just novices or not just great academians, but even a psychologist looks into history, because every now and then a historian may want or ask for a psychological assessment of a particular historical character from a real psychologist. And when psychologists analyze the history of Antiochus Epiphanes, they say he was quite literally clinically insane. By today's standard definition, he would be regarded as someone that was clinically insane. There's enough working evidence to actually say that.
even like over 2,000 years.
Check that out, right? Now, what I'm about to bring to your attention is very, very interesting. Let me go back. Sorry, let me go back one moment. Okay, so while Antiochus has his eyes on Egypt, he also has his eyes on the land of Israel. What Antiochus begins to do in his idea of usurping Egypt and finally taking over that as well, so as to bring all of Alexander's former empire under one man, the way Alexander had it. He begins now to amass gold and finances and resources throughout all the lands that he controls. Because what is he doing? He's trying to build up a military army.
Right.
During this period in history, the current king that's sitting on the Ptolemaic throne is weak. Not only is he weak, if you're familiar with some of Antiochus IV's history, he was also in jail. He was in prison at one time. And while he was in prison, he had a great relationship with the person who finally comes to be king in Egypt, so that they were friends. But this person was not as strong as him. He was much weaker. So Antiochus now believes that he can finally take over Egypt, because the guy who rules it believes that Antiochus is his friend. And on top of that, he's also weak. So what does Antiochus do? He understands that although the guy might be weak, to take control of Egypt is still not going to be any small bet at all whatsoever. So what does he do? again, he goes around and he collects silver and gold, because in the style of even American politics, before war is waged, what does the American president do? He approaches the Senate.
Right.
And what does he declare? I need money.
Mm.
I'm going to war.
Right.
It's exactly what Antiochus does, except he does it with a little bit more dictatorship, in the sense of George Bush. Remember when George Bush waltzed into the UN? He didn't ask them for the Iraq war. He said, "We going to war, and you're either with us or with the enemies." Remember that statement that was on
Yep.
every cover of every major newspaper
Yep.
in America?
Yep.
That was bold. In that same spirit, Antiochus marches throughout the regions that he controls and begins to gather silver. Now, at this point in history, Egypt still has a great relationship with Rome. So what Antiochus is forgetting is that because of the alliances that Egypt has with Rome, which is Kittim in the Bible, in the book of Daniel 11, because Egypt still has great alliances with Rome, picking a fight with Egypt is a declaration of war with Rome. Antiochus is still clinically a madman. So he still tries. We're about to see how. In 174 BC, Jason, who is pro-Greek, the former high priest, bribed Antiochus for the high priesthood from his brother Onias III, and he built a gymnasium. Hellenism was adopted by many in Israel. In 171 BC, Menelaus bought the priesthood away from Jason. Remember, the priesthood is now for hire. Ain't that something? This is really crazy. And in 169, he tries to regain control. As punishment, Antiochus pillages Jerusalem and the Jerusalem temple. But I have to give you a backdrop, because most of us are familiar with this, but the backdrop is missing. The historical context of what's going on in Egypt and Rome during this time. Remember, in the books of Daniel chapter 11, it says that the king of the north will march and advance against the king of the south. But ships of Kittim would stop him. That's Rome. Now let me give you the real history. So there's a Roman ruler, as it were, or governor, known as Aurelius. And he is a representative of the Roman Senate. He's not an emperor. He's not a king of Rome. He's just simply a representative of the Roman Senate. He's in Egypt during the time that Antiochus marches into Egypt with a legion of soldiers ready for battle. And when he does so, he's met by the then king of Egypt, as well as the head of the Roman Senate. The head of the Roman Senate is not dressed in military garb. He has on robes that Roman Senate representatives would have. He looks like an ambassador. He does not look like a general ready for war. And what he says to Antiochus is interesting. He says to him, "Why do you march in advance against Egypt, knowing and seeing that Rome is her greatest ally?" And Antiochus says, "How much does Syria have to pay Rome in order for Rome to stand down?" And the Senate said, "I don't think you understand me." He went around Antiochus and 5 of his top generals and drew a circle in the sand. And he came and stepped out of the circle, and he said to Antiochus, "If any of you or your generals advance just 1 foot out of that circle, it will be regarded as a declaration of war against Rome." What does Antiochus do? He knows that Rome is no joke. Rome at this point is like Russia. They waiting on a fight. For those of you who are familiar with contemporary history, you should know exactly what I mean by that. Russia is ready right now. And she has many allies in the Middle East. Rome was that person at that time. She was ready for war. And she also had many allies. And Antiochus knew, as crazy as he was, he didn't want no problems with Rome. So with great shame, because I want to tell you, in the ancient world, if you advance upon a nation state with a vast army and get turned down because somebody told you stand down, you not only look weak to the people you're talking to, but you look weak to the people that came with you. That should tell you how much power Rome had. That this man, who's deemed today as a clinically insane man, wouldn't step foot out of that circle because of the fear of Rome.
He was sane when it came to Rome.
Rome put him back in his senses. Right? Your mama style, slap you back into your senses. Right? So watch what begins to happen now. I want to also remind the family who's tuning in, because we're about to turn up the knowledge in a couple of moments. Family, share the live, thumb up the video. The more people that recognize what's going on in here is the more attention we bring to this. This is our culture. This is our way of life. When we get them Migos videos, we sharing them. When we get them little baby videos, we sharing them. We need to share our culture and our history, family. Thumb up the video and share it, please, family. Let's let the truth be known out here. That's our job as Israel. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
All right. So with that being said, one of the things that is known in psychology, since we're talking about psychology, one of the so-called founding fathers of psychology today, as far as the West is concerned, Sigmund Freud, he speaks of something called descent. Descent. And what he means by that is, you ever notice that when you can't respond a certain way in the workplace, or if you know people that can't respond a certain way in the workplace because your boss is treating you a certain way and because you need the job, you can't tell him how you really feel about him. So what do those people tend to do? When they come home, their children are about to face World War III. That's why children is wise. Make sure you are not playing when it comes to school and what you need to do around your house. You have no idea the amount of stress that your parents face on their way to work and when they get inside that job setting. We are fighting so many elements while we're there. And because we're human at the end of the day, it's human sometimes to take out your issue on someone who is weaker than you. That's human. It's not right, but it's human. So in speaking of descent, what Antiochus does, because Antiochus cannot touch Egypt because of the fear of Rome, and look at the book of Daniel 11 playing out perfectly, just as it says in the book of Daniel 11, and the king of the north approached the king of the south, Egypt, but ships of Kittim, Rome, stops him. And what does he do? Turns around and faces, and the Tanakh says, puts his eyes on the Holy Land. That's Jerusalem. That's Judea. That's the land of Israel. And that's where we're at right now. So because he can't do anything to Egypt, he takes out his rage and frustration and embarrassment on the Holy Land. This
Chief,
is why, yeah, Chief.
do you want me to read Daniel for you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know what? Let me share my screen. Since I have my shared screen, I want the people to see this. So I'll share my screen and open it up live, all right?
Okay, no problem.
Here we go. Thank you very much for saying that.
You are expert in this share screen game. You are expert.
Where are we? There we go. I got it. The book of Daniel. You guys are about to see my screen in a couple of seconds. And there we go. When you can see my screen, Chief, just please let me know that you can see my.
I could see it.
You can see it. Okay.
I could see it.
Hold on. I don't see it, so hold on.
You just took it away.
I just took it away? Okay,
Yeah.
let me try once more. What about now?
I see it.
Perfect. All right. So I'm going to go to the book of Daniel, chapter 11. I'm going to read through it very fast. In the first year of Darius the Mede, I took my stand. This is Daniel speaking. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
To strengthen and fortify him. And now I will tell you the truth. Persia will have 3 more kings, and the 4th will be wealthier than them all. By the power he obtains through his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Because remember, at this time, the kingdom of Greece is powerful. At this time, the kingdom of Greece is being led by an actual Macedonian, Philip IV, who's the father of Alexander the Great.
Yep.
And Philip IV is the one that passes the mantle, and his son eventually is the one that takes control of the then known world by taking over Persia. But the person they're speaking of in this moment is actually Philip IV.
Right.
Then a warrior king will appear who will have an extensive dominion and do as he pleases. Alexandros, the defender of men, absolutely. But after his appearance, his kingdom will be broken up and scattered to what? The 4 winds of the heaven.
Break it down,
but
Chief.
not for any of his posterity, his children, nor with dominion like that which he had. None of them control it all.
Right.
For his kingdom will be uprooted and belong to others, even besides these. So when it says scattered to the 4 winds, again, that's the Torah's allusion to Alexander's empire being broken up and divided among his 4 generals, like we saw earlier.
Right.
So again, for those who wonder if the Bible is historical, check the historical record. You darn right the Bible is historical. The king of the south will grow powerful. This is the Ptolemaic Empire. However, one of his officers will overpower him in rule, having an extensive dominion. After some years, an alliance will be made. By the way, one of his officers that will overpower him, we're talking about the Seleucid Empire, which is one of the officers of Alexander, because we're still speaking of these 4 generals as still being under Alexander until eventually they rule all of Alexander's empire, where we can speak about them as a single person. After some years, an alliance will be made, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to effect the agreement. As we know in the ancient day, even as we see it play out with the life of Solomon, many great kings created alliances through marriages. By the way, that still exists today, even among notable families, no matter where you are. I want to say, even looking at the Israelite community, you can see that in the Israelite community. You can see families that are regarded as great and have great lineage in our community. Many of their children go on to marry children from other quote unquote great families within the community. So we even still see that today.
That's right.
She will be surrendered. Excuse me. The daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to effect the agreement, but she will not maintain her strength, nor will his strength endure. She will be surrendered together with those who escorted her and the one who begot her and helped her during those times. So one of the daughters of the Ptolemaic kings is married now to one of the sons of the Seleucid kings. And this is done as a treaty or as an alliance. But both kings have hidden agendas because they're trying to use that moment to get closer to each other so that they can literally usurp one another's authority or throne. It comes to naught or nothing. A shoot from her stock will appear in his place, will come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north. He will fight and overpower him. He will also take their gods with their molten images and their precious vessels of silver and gold and go back to Egypt as booty. For some years, he will leave the king of the north alone. This is, I want to say, Ptolemy Sometra, which is like Ptolemy the fourth or Ptolemy the fifth. He goes into the Seleucid Empire and gives them quite a hefty beatdown. which is another reason why Antiochus has an issue with them, because just before Antiochus comes to rulership, the Ptolemaic kings are advancing towards the Seleucid Empire and they're beginning to embarrass them.
Right.
And they're doing this because Rome is backing them.
Right.
His sons will wage war, collecting a multitude of great armies. He will advance and sweep through as a flood, and will again wage war, as is his stronghold. Then the king of the south, in a rage, will go out to do battle with him, with the king of the north. He will muster a great multitude, but the multitude will be delivered into the foe's power. But when the multitude is carried off, he will grow arrogant. He will cause 10,000s to perish, but will not prevail. Then the king of the north will again muster a multitude even greater than the first. After a time, a matter of years, he will advance with a great army and much baggage. In those times, many will resist the king of the north, and the lawless sons of your people will assert themselves to confirm the vision, but they will fail. What this is referring to is around this time, we also have many Hellenized Jews, and many of them begin to assert themselves into powers of authority so as to make people think that God is with them because of everything they see happen. Because remember, at this time period, there's so much lawlessness in the land that in so many periods, contemporary with this period, many people who are regarded as great, they start to think of themselves and people who follow them as a Messiah or as the Messiah. But a lot of them weren't worth the Hebrew they were speaking. Many of them weren't worth the titles that people were giving them. And this was all in fulfillment of what the Creator was saying throughout the prophecies mentioned throughout the Torah about this particular period.
Right.
The king of the north will advance and throw up siege ramps and capture a fortress city, and the forces of the south will not hold out. Even the elite of his army will be powerless to resist. His opponent will do as he pleases, for none will hold out against him. He will install himself in the beautiful land with destruction within his reach. What do we think the beautiful land is?
Israel.
That's the land of Israel. So we're now talking about, again, the Seleucid kings now feasting their eyes on the land of Israel. He will set his mind upon invading the strongholds throughout his foes' kingdoms. But in order to destroy it, he will effect an agreement with him and give him a daughter in marriage. He will not succeed at it, and it will not come about. They
Can
tried
I just
and tried
interject real quick,
Yeah.
Chief? And that makes sense, because when they went in there, when you read in the book of Maccabees, right? They took Jerusalem because they had high walls, and they made a stronghold in Jerusalem, and they inserted spies and people that would watch people come into Jerusalem, and they stopped the people from coming down to Jerusalem to the temple to do offerings and things of that manner, and everybody went into the outskirts. So that prophecy right there coincides with what actually the book of Maccabees says, is that how they made citadels and strongholds within Jerusalem because they had high walls.
That's a fact. That's an absolute fact. Thank you very much for that, Chief. That's a fact.
Hallelujah.
It says, he will come to coastlands and capture many, but a council will put an end to his insults. Nay, pay him back for his insults. What council are we talking about? Why does it even say council? What was the Roman Senate regarded as? A body of council. That's why it says, but a council will put an end to his insult. It's talking about the beginning of the Roman Senate beginning to intervene between the issue or the matter or between the conflict between the king of the south, which is the Ptolemaic Empire, and the king of the north, which is the Seleucid Empire. Rome is now on the scene, starting from verse 18. He will head back to the strongholds of his own land, but will stumble, fall, and vanish. His place will be taken by one who will dispatch an officer to exact tribute for royal glory, but he will be broken in a few days, not by wrath or by war. His place will be taken by a contemptible man, on whom royal majesty was never conferred. He will come in unawareness and seize the kingdom through trickery. By now, we should be closer to who we know this is talking about.
Mm-hmm.
The forces of the flood will be overwhelmed by him and will be broken, and so too the covenant leader. And from the time an alliance is made with him, he will practice deceit, and he will rise to power with a small band. He will invade the richest of provinces unaware and will do what his fathers and forefathers never did, lavishing on them spoil, booty, and wealth. He will have designs upon strongholds, but only for a time. He will muster his strength and courage against the king of the south with a great army. The king of the south will wage war with a very great and powerful army, but will not stand fast, for they will devise plans against him. Those who eat of his food will ruin him, his own people. His army will be overwhelmed, and many will fall slain. The minds of both kings will be bent on evil while sitting at the table together. Remember, I said that they were friends.
Right.
They will lie to each other, but to no avail, for there is yet an appointed term. He will return to his land with great wealth, his mind set against the holy covenant. Having done his pleasure, he will return to his land. At the appointed time, he will again invade the south. But watch this. This is what I'm referring to. But the second time will not be like the first. Before ships from Kittim will come against him, he will be checked. Ain't that something? Don't we use that language today?
Yeah.
He came to the block and he checked him. He got G-checked. Don't we say that today?
That's right.
He will be checked and will turn back, raging against the holy covenant. He got embarrassed.
Right.
Having done his pleasure, he will then attend to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces will be levied by him. They will desecrate the temple, the fortress. They will abolish the regular offering and set up the appalling abomination. I don't want to go too much further because the rest I want to show in my PowerPoint. But the reason why Chief Uzziel suggested that we come here is so that you guys see that the historical record matches what the biblical record spoke 250 years before it played out in history. That's very powerful. I'd be remiss not to point that out. In 168 BC, Antiochus campaigned against Egypt, but was forced out by a delegation from Rome. Returning home, he desecrated the temple of God and forced the worship of his gods. So many of us, we know that the opening chapter of the books of Maccabees, I mean, it begins horrendous.
Right.
Whomever the Greek ruler is that's now making his stride in the land, he must be different from the rest of the Greek rulers because he's doing things that no Greek ruler before him did in the Holy Land. Don't you know that Alexander had such a great relationship, even though Israel was a conquered vassal state to Greece in the time of Alexander, Alexander still had such a great relationship with the land of Israel, and in particular with the priests in the land of Israel. How many of us are aware of the historical record which says that when Alexander the Great came to conquer the land of Israel originally, he was approached by the then high priest. The then high priest said to him, now, while you have conquered much of the northern part of this region, I would adjure you to stop where you're at. To which Alexander said, what God and what man can rival Alexander and the gods of Alexander? And the high priest began to break down to him the annals of history. He began to take him to the Egyptian captivity and tell him how God got his glory in Egypt and reminded Alexander that while he's great, there's still a God much greater than any man. And this God, he says, Alexander, if you check the record, which means there had to be a contemporary historical record of the destruction of Egypt in that time, because the high priest says to Alexander, if you check the record, you will see that my God has dealt many blows to the gods of many nations.
You might want to think twice about that, Alexander.
Right. So Alexander the Great decides in his wisdom, because remember, he also wasn't a fool.
Right.
He was trained among the greatest minds of Greece and in Egypt, in Africa. So Alexander the Great was a very intelligent man, by the way. So he took heed to the words of the high priest, and let's say that the Creator's hand was possibly upon him as well. And because of that, what the high priest did, and I want everyone to fact check me on this, you can actually do it simultaneously as I'm speaking. By the way, don't let people get away with just saying things. Always fact check a person, not to embarrass them, but just to make sure you're being fed with the right information. So as you're hearing things, you might want to fact check it live. Many of us have other devices. Have them open so you can fact check the information. That's the only way that this lecture is meaningful. Not because we said it's true, but because everyone can verify it's true. So
Hey,
with
Chief,
that, yes.
and just to add one thing, because you said that Alexander was very smart.
Yes.
His actual teacher and professor was Aristotle.
Absolutely fact. And we know what the historical record says or suggests about Aristotle. And let's make this clear. Aristotle himself was very intelligent because he learned in Africa. And because he learned and studied all of the wisdom of many African peoples, which would even include the African peoples of the Bible.
Right.
And this is what made all of the Greek, quote unquote, founders of science, math, and philosophy, all of them were trained in Africa under many of our ancestors. Let's be very clear on that. So in speaking again of Antiochus, one of the reasons why Antiochus, who I'm speaking about right now, my apologies. In speaking of Alexander the Great and the treaty that he sets up with the high priests, in recognition of the fact that Alexander did not even wave his sword in Jerusalem once the high priest approached him, the high priest agreed that in honor of Alexander not even attempting to destroy the city, that every male child that would be born in the land of Israel for a full year, they all would be named Alex. It's a historical fact, by the way.
Wow.
It's a historical fact.
He said they all will be named Alexander.
Alexander. Maybe I said Alex because that's my real birthday. But yeah, Alexander. They were all named Alexander. And the story within that is that's how I found out what that was. I was looking up my name one day, Alexander, the origins, and it brought me to the story of Alexander the Great. And this was before my knowledge of Torah. And in doing that, once coming into Torah now, I go deeper into it and I see that in this event, in this time in history, every male Judite was called Alexander in recognition of that. This is something, guys, that you can actually research online. Make sure you do. Okay. So as we noted before, the entirety of Daniel's chapter 11 plays out in the opening chapters of the books of Maccabees and throughout the annals of history. In the book of Daniel 11:31, let's see what it says. It says, and we're right there, forces will be levied by him, Antiochus Epiphanes. They will desecrate the temple, the fortress. They will abolish the regular offering and set up the abomination of desolation. What was the abomination of desolation? It was a statue of Zeus Olympus. Why was that significant? This is the backdrop that I want to give everyone, because when we recall the events of Antiochus marching into Jerusalem, setting up a statue of Zeus Olympus, I don't think enough of a backdrop is usually given in the story to know what Antiochus is actually doing. Antiochus does not care to find a statue of Zeus Olympus somewhere. What we need to know is the statue of Zeus Olympus that's set up in the Jerusalem temple by Antiochus is a statue of Zeus Olympus in the likeness of Antiochus. Because remember, he calls himself Antiochus Epiphanes. Zeus manifests, or God manifests. So the statue of Zeus that he would be building is in his image, so that the reason why he places it in the Jerusalem temple, because just like the Ptolemaic kings, he too wants to be regarded as what?
As a god. That's right.
So that the people in
Nisut.
the temple, we're not just bowing down if they do this to worship Zeus now, but they would also be worshiping Antiochus.
There you go.
That's the backdrop to the story.
Right.
Very, very important.
Eliminate the religion of the eliminate the religion also of the quote unquote religion of the Jews in that point, right? All those things.
Absolutely. by taking the altar of offering and sacrifice, by removing all of those holy items from the temple. What he quite literally was doing was replacing the spiritual system, or what is called today the religious system. And he was instituting the worship of himself.
That makes sense.
And
never looked at it that way. That's a great
the
point.
pig, that's a really good point. Remember, in many of our ceremonies, there are certain animals that become focal to the ceremony.
Right.
So when we talk about Yom Kippur, the animal that we all know to be focal to the ceremony are the he-goats.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the worship of Zeus, the animal that's focal to sacrifice is a pig.
It's a pig.
Pig. So that's why you see, and this is an actual image, by the way.
Right.
This is a real life image of Antiochus Epiphanes marching a pig into a holy place to be sacrificed in honor of himself, because remember, he wanted to teach people that he was Zeus himself. Let me blow this up a little bit so we can get a closer look. Okay. An altar to Zeus was erected over the altar of burnt offerings, and the worship of Zeus was instituted in the temple. Now, because we read it as such in the book of Maccabees, we assume that they were just worshiping Zeus. Remember, the Zeus that you was worshiping was Zeus in the image and form of Antiochus. So that's what people were worshiping on December. And look at the day.
I know you're gonna tie it in.
On December 25th, in the year 167 before the Common Era, a pig was sacrificed on the Zeus altar. Now, let me just ask a question to many of the people who are watching, who at one time had Christian practice in their household, or practice as a Christian, or observed or celebrated Christmas. Many of our people did. Let me include myself. Many of us did. How many of us, in recollecting that part of our history, remember that almost 98% of the time, there was some kind of pork included in the Christmas meal?
Yes, sir. That ham.
That's big in Christmas, not just here in America, but also in the Caribbean, in the UK, right, in Canada. There's a major part of Christmas that the pig is associated with. This goes back to ancient Greco-Roman practice, where the patron sacrificial animal for the lowercase god Zeus is a pig. So on December 25th, when people are worshiping or celebrating what is known as Christmas, what you're actually doing is you're reviving many parts of Greco-Roman religion, which Christianity is just the newest face of.
There you go.
That's it. It's a carbon copy, quite literally. Christianity becomes the carbon copy of Greco-Roman religion. Yes, many of our people are coming to this understanding now, which is why many of our people who don't even call themselves Israelites reject Christmas. Yet many of them still not rejecting them Christmas gifts. But you gotta start somewhere, right, Chief?
That's right. These conscious people that still celebrate Xmas.
Oh man, we could do a whole lecture on that one. Let me be nice. Here we go. Next slide. In Maccabees, the opening scenery, first book, 41 through 62, here are some of the things that Antiochus Epiphanes does. He forbids the Shabbat,
yes, sir,
the festivals, offerings at the temple, and defiles the priests in the sanctuary. Let me unpack this a moment so that people can understand this.
Talk about it.
What Antiochus is doing is eliminating those parts of our spiritual system that would make it impossible to function as an Israelite in accordance with the will of God. By taking away these things, you can call yourself an Israelite all you want, but you are no longer in concert with the divine decrees upon which heaven and earth was founded upon which the Creator spoke from Mount Sinai through his servant Moshe. Now watch this. So in 2020, when you have Israelites that say, well, there's a portion in the book that God says he hates our feast days. We don't have to keep the Shabbat nor the festivals. When you have Israelites say, we don't know who the priests are. So, being clean is of no significance nor manner.
Talk about
What
it.
you're actually doing is the same job that Antiochus Epiphanes is doing. You are removing those elements of our culture and our heritage that bar us and prohibit us from being in concert with serving our God. Israel, be mindful, be watchful, beware. You might be following after the heathen in your ignorance when you find every and any excuse to deny telling your boss, I know I need the job, but I need 52 days off. The hell you talking about? Well, I'm a Sabbath observer. That comes in once a week, and there's 52 weeks in a year. To most people, that sounds crazy. You got to think about it. We are warriors when we go on a job site and have the audacity and courage to look the boss in the face on a job that opens possibly on weekends too, and says, I can work pretty much any day.
Right.
But I guarantee you this, there's 52 days I can't work. And watch out, because there's 18 more that I can't work either. So I need a total of 70 days, boss. Most people right now listening think that I'm out of my mind. But watch how this makes sense. For most people in the world, most people work a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. Most people. You have essential workers that work on weekends too, of course, especially among our people. But for the most part, most people in the workforce, they work a 9 to 5. And I'm just using that time period, that time frame. It doesn't have to be exactly 9 to 5. You know what I mean? But they basically work Monday through Friday. So at the outset, it sounds crazy to a boss. But when you're on a job setting that's usually just 9 to 5, you could kind of take the heat away from yourself by saying to the supervisor or the boss, I know this sounds crazy, but remember, you guys are on open Saturday anyway. But if you are, just know that I can't work. But on the flip side, Israel, use your wisdom. I read somewhere that Jacob was rightfully called a supplanter. Use the wisdom of your ancestor. While you are in there, because anytime you're in a job interview, you're negotiating. That's what it's about.
Right.
A job interview, a major part of a job interview is about negotiating. If you're really serious.
Right.
I don't just go on job interviews. No one should go on job interviews and just accept everything the person says. Right. You look crazy to the person interviewing them. You know, when a white person goes into a job, they also tell, after the boss gives them a description of the job and everything it entails, the white person says, well, I'm going to need this wage. Black people are so happy to get a job. We come in at no matter what the wage is that the white man says. Guys, don't do that. Don't do that. Use your intelligence, use your wisdom. I promise you, they're going to say something. If this person is seriously willing to wager with me or negotiate with me on the terms of how I'm hiring them and how much I should pay them, this is probably somebody that's going to be a huge value and asset.
Right.
I want you to really think about that psychologically. Now watch this. Again, Israelites, be careful. While we're finding every reason not to practice the Shabbat and holy days, remember, it was Antiochus Epiphanes that originally did this. But I'm not done there, because Antiochus Epiphanes also said that he's going to change the days of the feast days. Some of y'all new Israelites, I had to grab the mic to say this, need to sit y'all behinds all the way down and learn before you start teaching. Right. Several years ago, when I came into this way of life, there was no argument about when the Shabbat was.
That's right.
Now, with the explosion of social media and Israelites being created from a Facebook post, a YouTube post, an Instagram post, now everyone's a teacher. The guy that wakes up today is a leader of 50 men tomorrow, quite literally in this community. And that's a shame, because how do you become a teacher when you haven't finished learning yourself? How? And while we all agree no one ever stops learning or finishes learning, you still get my point. You haven't learned enough to go out and teach. What you doing? And it shows by what you saying. the day is just when we see the light outside. What the
Right.
hell is you talking about? What are you talking about?
Right.
I know what you're talking about. You talking that same stuff Antiochus Epiphanes was talking about. You talking about reinventing the wheel that God put here.
Right.
You talking about doing your own thing, because it's the ego of man to think that everybody got it right, got it wrong, but him. There's a lot of us walking around with those ideas. Israel, humility, humility, humility. Before you go out and teach, make sure you learned enough to open your mouth and just be able to speak about what this is first. You'd be horrified at the people that describe themselves as Hebrew teachers, don't know no Hebrew. Historians don't know no history. Teachers of the Bible don't know no Bible. He appointed the inspectors over all the people and commanded the towns of Judah to offer sacrifices to idols and to sacrifice and eat swine and other unclean animals. Anyone found possessing the book of the covenant or anyone adhering to the Torah was condemned to death. Don't you know there's a growing segment of Israelites now that are finding more ways to stop keeping certain laws? If we keep going at this pace, what commandments are going to be left? What houses of worship can we show up at when the morale is totally removed? Because that's what happens when you remove the commandments. The morale is no longer there.
Right.
Anyone found possessing the book of the covenant or anyone adhered to the Torah was condemned to death. He put to death the women who had their children circumcised, and they hung infants from their mothers' necks. Let me say this, family. I can't tell you how many Israelites are in my inbox. I'm new to this way of life, and can we keep Hanukkah? Absolutely, brother. And here's the reason why. You can watch this video and you can come back and we can dialogue about it. Okay, cool. Hey, I have another question for you. Can I circumcise my child? Absolutely. Here's a teaching on it. Here's a video on it. Let's dialogue about it. What do Israelites do? Come home. Wife say, what you trying to do? I'm going to circumcise my boy. No, I was watching a YouTube the other day that said you're supposed to have the skin over there. It protects you. So they arguing now, and that could happen with either the wife or the husband. I'm not picking on it, by the way.
Right.
Because literally in our community it can happen, and it does happen with both. You might have a sister in this way of life who is coming to the temple or coming to the knowledge of Torah, and the guy that she's courting is outside of this way of life, and he might be against it. He might say something fly to her like, well, in African tradition, we don't think that that's necessary because, we got a lot of New Age people out here too.
Right.
So what happens now, Israel? What I'm saying is especially now found even among Israelites. You got Israelites now that's saying, you don't really need to do that, That's why the Messiah came already. And not all, and some of y'all gonna think I'm throwing shots at my Messianic brothers, but not all Messianics think like that, but there still are some that do. So we got to talk about it. I haven't met any brothers in the Old Testament community to address that with them, but I'm speaking of the Messianics, some Messianics that I've ran into that don't think that they need to do that. What I'm saying to all of our brothers, all of our sisters in the community, what you would then be doing is acting in the same vein as the one who came and set up the abomination of desolation, which caused most of the nation to flee the land. Now, many of our people were attacked on the Shabbat.
Yes, they were.
Now, what's dangerous about that? I got to speak on these things, Chief. I hope you don't mind.
Oh, go ahead. Let's go.
What's dangerous about that? You know how many Israelites there are in so many different dimensions of our community that use the Shabbat day as a day of battle for other Israelites, that use their moment having the spotlight to talk about other Israelites. I know of a particular minister and pastor who uses his Sabbath services to talk about other Israelite groups. I know Old Testament Israelites that do that. And what I want to say in this moment is, whenever we use the Creator's Day to do something other than what the Creator told us we should be focused on, we're in trouble.
In trouble, big
Because
trouble.
remember, what was the tactic of the Hellenistic or the Hellenizing Greeks? They would attack us on the Shabbat.
Right.
And remember, we looked at that and we got on our knees and prayed to the Almighty for answers, because of all days to be attacked on God Almighty. What should we do? This is the Shabbat.
Right.
Fast forward in 2020, Israelites using the Shabbat to attack each other.
Mm-hmm.
Damn. Damn.
Mm.
The Maccabean Revolt. The Maccabean Revolt began as guerrilla warfare. For the first time, you had huge groups of Jews or Yehudim that would say, unlike our predecessors, we're
Right.
going to fight. Because the first thing the Torah is a way of life. We can't keep Torah if we dead.
No, we can't.
So y'all not going to chop at us on the Shabbat and we just going to take it. We're going to have to pray to our God and then grab our sword. And then notice, because our ancestors did that, we're able to speak about that today. Had they not done that, none of us would be here, because there would be no remnants left of our spiritual beliefs, as Greek was coming to destroy it. But because our ancestors chose to stand as men, we are here today. And even the women, I don't want to speak as if I'm leaving the women out, because when you open up the book of 2nd Maccabees, you learn about Hannah and her 7 sons. Woo! You want to talk about resilience and martyrdom? By 166 BCE, Mattathias is killed. But before we talk about the killing of Mattathias, I want to first talk about the appointment of Mattathias. I don't want to jump too fast.
Right.
When Mattathias notices that the Greeks have such an control and grip on the Holy Land, but in particular Jerusalem, remember the history and story. Mattathias is what? A Levite. And guess what? He's also believed to be part of what? The priestly clan. That's how his sons was able to what? Cleanse the temple. Remember the story says his sons cleansed the temple, Judah Maccabee.
Right.
How could you do that unless you were a member of the priestly class?
Right.
There are many different divisions of Levites, but in order to go inside that temple and cleanse certain areas, especially the Holy of Holies, who you had to be? A member of the priestly class. So Mattathias notices one day an Israelite is appointed, and Chief, I can remember sitting years ago in our temple when you would be called to speak on this moment. Whenever you would speak about this, it was always so powerful. If you don't mind, Chief, I would like for you to share in this moment that time in history as Mattathias is standing as these 2 Israelites about to commit all kinds of abomination. And how does Mattathias respond?
Mattathias, you mean when the ambassador came and told them to turn to the religion and to abandon their way of life when they came to Modin?
That's right. And was asking them to be first.
And was asking them to eat the swine's flesh. He told Mattathias, he said, come on. He said, you being a leader in the midst of all these people, they'll follow you. You'll make our job easy. Right. And just partake of the meat and, be Hellenized and be like us, and we could be all good. Mattathias said, over my dead body, he said, me and none of us that are here are ever going to forsake the laws of the Most High God. He said, even if the whole entire world turns, he said, even if the whole entire world turns and does what the king says to do, he said, us here in Modin, we not going to do it. Then you had a sellout, Uncle Tom, probably a Candace Owen descendant, ancestor of Candace Owens, or, any one of those sellouts that you see out there, Silk and Diamond, you know what I mean? You see them walk up, he said, well, I don't care what Mattathias got to say. I'm going to go have the swine's flesh and I'm going to do it. Said Mattathias ran up on him It said with a righteous anger.
Think about that.
So with a righteous anger and killed them and killed the ambassadors that the king Antiochus sent.
That's right.
And then they had to take flight.
That's right. That's right. Remember, children are always watching. I always say, in looking back at this story, how was, what are the contributing factors to why Judah Maccabee was so powerful? Look at his father. Look at his father.
Right.
Parents, we can't afford to be weak out here. Your children watching.
Right.
Don't you ever get chumped, especially around your children. If at any time you stand and be a man, it's to be a man in the midst of your family. Every man is not, well equipped for every situation, but when it comes to the defense of your family and when it comes to the inspiration of your family, men, you have to actually be men. And that's what this time is calling for. This time is calling for our brothers, not to just simply be brothers, but our brothers need to stand up and be men. We are watching so many atrocities in the community. And at a certain point, the women have to say, how long will the man, the protector of the household, stand still? How long? But one thing Mattathias saw is that he actually had people that was ready to throw down with him. So it made it easier for him to jump out. Brothers, it's not going to happen. Us actually standing up as men won't happen until enough of us make ourselves as men.
Right.
We got to gird our loins, as the Torah says,
and
prepare. Man up. Judah takes command and leads the revolt into Jerusalem. Antiochus dies. By the year 164 BCE, the Maccabees win and retake the temple. The idols and pagan objects are removed from the temple, and they begin what is called Hanukkah. They begin to rededicate the temple. The story of Hanukkah and the miracle of the oil that is regarded as coming from the book of Maccabees, I'm going to point out to you now something that a lot of people probably didn't even know. Where in the book of Maccabees did you read that the oil lasted for 8 days?
Nowhere.
Nowhere. That's rabbinic tradition in the oral tradition of the Talmud.
Right.
You're going to see in a couple moments where that comes from.
Right.
I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but let me read on something. The Maccabees. Greek soldiers came to Modin and offered Mattathias a noble title if he would offer up a sacrifice to their gods. Mattathias slew the Greek officer, as Chief Uzziel said, and the apostate Jew, and led a rebellion with his 5 sons in the Judean hill. Think about that number 5. God is great. God is great. Everything in the Torah is symbolic, even though this is a historical truth that he really had 5 sons. When you really sit down to think about it, it's quite possible that he had 5 sons because of the whole image of the story. His 5 sons preserved the Torah, which is given to us in what? 5 books.
Right.
And was presented to us by the right hand of God in accordance with the book of Deuteronomy. From the right hand of God came a fiery Torah.
Right.
Deuteronomy 5. Your right hand has how many fingers? 5.
5.
After Mattathias' death, Judah took charge and became known as Maccabee or Hammer. And that is how the Greeks render his name. The Greeks, when they tell the story, and mind you, if anyone's wondering if it's historical, this is one of those moments. The Greeks say that they named him Maccabee. The Greeks can't say that they named him Maccabee if the story isn't historical, guys.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Let's just think about that for a moment. So the Greeks say they named him Maccabee.
Right.
And it means hammer. But I want to challenge that in this moment. In Daniel 11:32, before starting, and therefore knew he could win. Now, Maccabee is also an acronym for a term we find all throughout the book of Psalms and a couple places in the Bible. Mi kamoka ba'alim Yehovah. Who is like you, Yehovah, among the lesser gods? The lowercase gods. And by lesser gods, let me not confuse nobody out there. We're talking about no gods. Through guerrilla warfare, they won their freedom. 3 years later, Mattathias' family, known as the Hasmoneans, then ruled over Israel until the Romans. So in understanding elements of this story, I first want to say to you that while there is a strong historical sentiment that Judah was surnamed the Maccabee or the Hammer by the Greeks, I want to remind you that our tradition says that the name Maccabee is an acronym for the initial letters of the phrase that we find throughout the Bible, which is, who is like thee, Yehovah, among the heavenly powers. We know about the rededication of the temple. This is what I'm about to revisit. They cleansed the temple and moved the stones of altar of the burnt offering until a prophet should arise. This may have been a late celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, which is 8 days. But watch this. Only the Talmud mentions the miracle of oil lasting 8 days. This is why I say, Israelites, make sure you know what you're saying. Because a lot of us say we disagree with the oral tradition and we disagree with the Talmud, while a lot of people still have Talmudic teachings on their lips. Don't you know all of groups like ISUPK, when they teach about the Feast of Dedication, when they teach about Hanukkah, they're going to say the oil lasted 8 days. To which I'm going to say, I thought you don't agree with the Talmud. To which they're going to say, I don't. To which I'm going to say, well, show me that in the book of Maccabees. To which they're going to say, what you going to say? Because it ain't in there, bro.
They have nothing to say.
Got nothing to say now. By the way, we do this often in our class. We challenge everything.
That's right.
Everything your teacher says to you, challenge it. And when I say challenge it, when your teacher says something, you don't automatically say, how I know that's true, you liar. No, challenge it in the sense of go and research what your teacher is saying. Many teachers say it as they're teaching. Check it out. Research it. We used to have an elder. Exactly. We used to have an elder that our elders would brag about that was before our time, right, Chief? He's known as read the book Daniel.
Right.
He was known to say in B'nai Zakim, read the book. Don't believe me. Check it out.
Yep.
If your teacher does not expect that you should go and fact check what they're saying, guaranteed your teacher have no credible source for what they're saying.
Right.
No teacher should be embarrassed or afraid that you are fact checking their work.
Right.
Or else, what the hell are we really doing? What are we doing?
Teacher has to be prepared.
That's right. So when you look at sceneries like this, of a single jar of oil, which lasted for 8 days, even though the cruise was only filled enough to fill up one, just know that that originates in the Talmud. And I actually provide the Talmudic quote, Shabbat 21b. Knowledge is power. Other heroes of Hanukkah. Me and you were talking about this earlier, Chief.
Right.
You said, Chief, no matter what you do, that lecture can't end unless you talk about Sister Hannah and her 7 sons. So we got to talk about that. In 2 Maccabees 4, and 2 Maccabees and 4 Maccabees, the martyrdom,
depending on which version you got, right?
Right, depending on which version you got. Thank you for pointing that out, Chief.
Right.
The martyrdom of Rabbi Eliezer, how he refused to eat swine's flesh or pretend to do so. The martyrdom of Hannah's 7 sons. Each son was tortured progressively, worse from the oldest to youngest in the sight of the mother and the brothers. And by the way, since we got the book of the Apocrypha here today that we can show, we're going to look at that live in class and use that to kind of close out the lecture.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right? Right.
Yes, sir. We could do that.
I know it's been late, family, but I thank you all for tuning in. We're about to bring it to a close, but I thank you all for tuning in. I'm going to continue to ask the family to thumb up that video and to share it. This brings awareness, family. Make sure you thumb up the video. That brings attention to Uziel Levy's channel. And by sharing the video, the community is aware of what we're doing.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it.
All right. Second Maccabees 2. It should be 2 and 7. Let me check it again. Should be Second Maccabees. Yes, 2 and
Should be
7.
around chapter 6 or chapter 5.
7.
7, okay.
Maybe it's 7 in Sepharia. You see it on my screen?
Yeah, that's the one with the woman. But Elazar, I think, is chapter 6.
Oh, yeah. All right, so I was gonna do Hannah first, but
No, do Hannah. Go ahead. I'm not switching up what you're doing. You do it. You do it.
All right, I'll close with Elazar, Chief.
Okay.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Also, a woman and her 7 sons were in prison in the jail. The king tortured them to make them eat pig's meat. Beat them with rods and sticks. Family, what I want to say to you right now is, imagine that. When our ancestors ate pig, is because they were tortured.
They were tortured.
Damn. Doesn't that say something to how far we fell? In order for our ancestors to go against the will of God, they had to be forced and tortured. And watch this, because in reading this story, even some of our ancestors that were forced and tortured still didn't do it. He beat them with rods and sticks. The firstborn said to him, "What do you ask and what do you request from us? Behold, you will strangulating us with rather than turn us from the laws of our God." Excuse me, laws of our forefathers. That got him angry. I could see Sepharia got some issues with the way they're wording it. And I'm reading it the way they worded it, so I sound just as crazy as them. Because it shouldn't say that got angry at him. It should say that made him angry. So let me make the necessary adjustments. It says, "Behold, you would rather strangle us than turn us from the laws of our forefathers." That got him angry. He commanded to place a pan and coals on the fire. What do you think they're going to do with that? And they did so. He commanded to cut his tongue and to flay his skin. Anybody ever flayed a fish or seen a fish skin scraped? That's what they're talking about when they're talking about flaying of the skin. Right. By the way, there's another great Israelite mind who also, by the way, he was a convert. Let me not say Israelite. He was a convert, but he was not a Gentile convert, but he was a convert. This person is called Rabbi Akiva. Upon his martyrdom, he also was flayed alive. Flayed alive, meaning they peeled his skin from head to toe. And they cut off his hands and feet in front of his mother and brothers. Let me just say something right now. If you give somebody a good behind whooping in front of their family, you're going to see their faces turn all the way up. Right. Can you imagine dismembering someone in front of their brothers? Who you do that in front of somebody's brothers, you know it's go time. And in front of their mother. Can you imagine the heart and spirit of that mother in that moment? They say no mother should have to bury a child. What about the parent that has to watch their child being put to death? Right. And even after that, what does she still not do? It was in his appearance was so destroyed that he no longer looked like a man. The king commanded to place him in the coals to roast him alive. This is just to eat pig. Just to eat pig. It was when the smoke became thick, each of the sons strengthened his brother and also the mother to die happily and with a good heart.
Chief, I gotta run out real quick from the video. I'll be right back.
Okay.
All right.
They said, "Fear of God is upon us. He has comforted us with his great kindness, just like Moses, the servant of God, sang, and on his servants he comforted them." Deuteronomy 32:36. So notwithstanding all of this that they're witnessing, seeing, and observing, they're still holding on to their faith. How many of us can say that? Israelites get embarrassed on Facebook, and tomorrow they're ready to stop calling themselves Israelites. We got to man up. We got to woman up. We got to nation up. We got to Torah up because we are weak. An Israelite get cussed out good on Facebook today. Tomorrow they hotepping. Look at the strength of our ancestors and what they went through. Israel, we've got to do better. The first son died, and they took the second son to make fun of him. After they flayed his skin from upon his flesh, they plucked the hairs of his head, and they asked him, saying, would you eat pig meat before the rest of you is removed from your bones? After all that, what does he say? Lo, meaning no. They took him and tortured him just like they did the first son. It was when his life was leaving him. He said to the king, man of blood, behold, our life is in your hand to take it. Therefore, our God who is in heaven will awaken his spirit upon us and bring us to life forever, because we died for his holy Torah. They brought the third son, and they insulted him. It was when they requested his tongue, and they took it out of his mouth, he sent forth his hand and said, the Lord our God, these are the bones that you gave me. With the goodness of my heart, I am giving them for the sake of your holy Torah and for your salvation. I hope for you, you surely will return to me. He couldn't even speak. His tongue was cut out. What does he do? Gesture with his hands and speaks from his spirit. That's powerful. That shows you how strong our ancestors were. And I want to say, maybe they knew something we didn't. Maybe they understood Torah a little better than us, because anybody that would be willing to suffer in this manner, to not violate the command of the Torah, the edict of the Torah, clearly apprehends and understands the Torah much greater than many of us today who are so weak. From a shameful Facebook post, we're ready to leave the Israelite religion, culture or way of life. Israelites be in a bad relationship. Oh, my husband was bad. 2 weeks later, the sister not an Israelite. The brother, oh, my wife don't want to keep Torah. It's becoming a problem in the house. A month later, he stopped keeping Torah. How weak have we become? How weak, and mind you, this is real stories. This happens. Stick around for a while and you see that what I'm saying is no exaggeration. It was after he died, they tortured the fourth son and tied him with whips. When his breath was still in his nostrils, he says, better to trust in the Lord
There you
and
go.
to trust in men.
Then
I will take to an eternal life, and you will never wake. Wow. Wow. Afterwards, they brought the fifth child. You mean after seeing this, these guys didn't get down and start eating that pig?
No.
No.
They ain't budge.
No.
They got stronger as they went along.
They got stronger. So we over here complaining, oh, you mean I got to read through all these ingredients?
Yeah.
You mean I got to check the bag of chips? Is that serious, Ak?
That's right.
Your ancestors rather took death than to eat it. I think it is that serious, Ak.
Yep.
Afterwards, they brought the fifth and tortured him. He saw the face of Antiochus and said, behold, the power is in your hand to convict as you desire. But since you are a son of death, do not think that the Lord has forsaken his nation. Stand for just a moment, and you will see the hand of the Lord when he will strike you in your house. And that's exactly how Antiochus died. Antiochus didn't die in battle. His death was regarded a plague. In the ancient day, when they couldn't understand how a man of a younger disposition dies without having any injury that nobody knows about, they called it a plague. Antiochus didn't die a normal death.
Okay.
And this man's worth came to fruition.
Right.
Because he says he saw the face of Antiochus. And he said to him, stand just for a moment, and you will see the hand of the Lord when he will strike you and your house. They also brought the sixth, and it was before his breath left him to die. He said, guard yourself, lest you lean on words of falsehood. Wow. They don't make them like they used to, Israel.
No, they don't.
Behold, all these terrible things happened to us because we were wicked to the Lord our God. And he increased his strikes against us. Just pay attention and listen, for it will not escape from the Lord God that you blasphemed him. It is true Who will not be in awe of the mental fortitude of this woman? Is she not fit to be a banner of the nations?
That's right.
Behold, she saw her 7 sons slaughtered before her eyes in a single day. She strengthened her despair upon me with her hope to the Lord. How many of us would have totally left the Israelite way of life in that second? The woman still walked away praising God. I promise you, they don't make them like they used to.
They don't. They don't.
And with that being said, they really don't. They really don't. With that being said, I wanted to talk about the division of the later tribes, but it's kind of late. We'll bring it to a close, Chief.
Okay. Once again, thank you, my brother. Man, you took it to another level with all of the dates and connecting it with Danielle and bringing it to a head and showing how we got to this point in history and how our forefathers, the resilience of our forefathers, and how they regardless of what they were facing, they were able to persevere and put their trust in the Creator, which is very important even during this story is still relevant. This history is still relevant today for strength. You know, when you're feeling weak, when you're feeling like you want to go sideways, it shows you the resilience of our ancestors during that time and how they withstood, you know, the oppression of a evil one. So I thank you, my brother, for helping me out today and for making my job easy today.
Very welcome, Chief. It's always an honor to serve in this capacity. It's always an honor to be received by you. You know, I look up to you as a big brother. So
Hallelujah.
I had a class today, and I reached out to the class and I reminded them that today is also Hanukkah. So we're going to have a special lecture.
Hallelujah. So I'd like to welcome everyone and my brother Chief Avdiel's class. May the Most High God continue to bless you all. May the Most High God continue to bless Chief Avdiel to teach you and put you in the right path and give you all the knowledge that he has in order for you to become great. Remember, in the words of Chief of Chiefs, is like he used to say, like he said in his last interview, he said, a great teacher is not a teacher who puts everything that he has into you, but a great teacher is he who pulls out of you your greatness, right? So not only does he teach you, but he also gets out of you and he learns from you. So those are the things that you keep in mind as a teacher, as a students, that you also, when you are a good student, you also cause your teacher to learn. And like you said, question everything, continue to grow, continue to have that understanding, continue to study. I see that you graduated some people from the Hebrew class.
Oh, yeah.
Congratulations to all of you. I seen Austin Trout up there.
Thank you.
Graduated. We need to get him to read. Maybe not this week, but next week we get your class back in there to read again. The graduates, get them to go up there and read. I'll speak to More Arani and get the class in there and get them to read in next week's portion.
Excellent.
On Shabbat.
Excellent. We love that, Chief.
Hallelujah. So
yeah.
Once again, to my people on Facebook, to my people on YouTube, thank you for tuning in, all you listeners. As you can see, I got a message pinned to the top of the chat on YouTube. If you would like to donate, you could donate on a Cash App at $UZZI940. That's for all of you that would like to donate. That's the $ symbol UZZI940. And you could also donate to me on PayPal at Uzi940 at Yahoo. That's UZZI940 at Yahoo.